Hi guys, have you ever wondered why your great-great-grandmother might have owned a postcard of a tabby cat dressed as a Victorian gentleman, complete with top hat and monocle, sitting at a tiny desk pretending to write a letter? Before we start, likes and subscribes help me keep making these. Where are you listening from? Drop your city and time in the comments. I'm always reading them thinking, wait, people in New York listen to history stories to sleep. Okay, tonight we're talking about why Edwardian ladies collected postcards of cats in costumes. But before we go anywhere, get cosy, pillows good, blanket situation handled. Perfect. Trust me on this one. You're standing in a parlour in 1907, somewhere in middle-class England, maybe Derby or Bristol, or one of those towns that sounds like it should be serving tea at all hours. The wallpaper is flocked velvet in a pattern that makes your eyes tired just looking at it. There's a sideboard with too many decorative plates, a plant that's probably slowly dying in the corner, and on the marble-top table near the window there's an album. Not a photo album, though there might be one of those somewhere too. This is a postcard album, bound in embossed leather with gilt edges, and it's stuffed absolutely full of images. You flip it open, expecting scenic views of the seaside or perhaps some artfully photographed monuments. Instead you find cats. Cats in wedding dresses, cats having tea parties, cats playing cricket, cats dressed as nurses, as policemen, as schoolteachers sternly pointing at a tiny chalkboard. And the woman who owns this album, let's call her Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton, has organised them with the kind of care usually reserved for genealogical records or pressed flowers from significant life events. This isn't a joke to her. This is a collection, a hobby. Something she talks about with her friends over actual tea, comparing notes on where to find the best examples, which photographers produce the finest work, which series are worth completing. There are entire social networks built around this. Women write to each other, trade duplicates, discuss the merits of various cat breeds and costume. And if you think this sounds ridiculous, well, you're not entirely wrong. But you're also not seeing the whole picture, because what looks like absurdity from the outside is actually a window into something much more interesting about how people lived, what they valued, and how they found tiny pockets of joy and control in a world that didn't offer them very many. Let's back up for a second and talk about what a postcard even is in 1907, because it's not quite what you think. You're used to postcards as those flimsy things you buy at tourist traps, write 3 sentences on and mail to your aunt to prove you went somewhere. But in the Edwardian era, postcards are a phenomenon. They're a craze, a mania, a full-blown cultural obsession that has swept through Europe and America like some kind of benign plague. The numbers are honestly staggering. Britain alone is producing and sending hundreds of millions of postcards every year. People are sending postcards the way we send text messages now, just constantly, for any reason or no reason at all. Good morning, here's a postcard. I'm thinking of you, here's a postcard. I have nothing particular to say, but the mail comes twice a day and I might as well participate, here's a postcard. The Postal Service has made this possible by introducing the postcard rate, which is cheaper than a letter. You can send a postcard for a halfpenny, while a letter costs a full penny. And in an era when people are counting their pennies quite literally, this matters. Plus, postcards are fast. In London you can mail a postcard in the morning and it arrives the same afternoon. You can use them to confirm lunch plans, apologise for missing an appointment, or just send a cat in a sailor suit to your friend because you saw it at the stationer's and thought of her. And the variety. Oh, the variety. You can buy postcards of anything. Seaside resorts, famous buildings, portraits of the royal family, reproductions of paintings, sentimental verses surrounded by flowers, patriotic images, comic scenes, and yes, animals in human clothing. Lots and lots of animals in human clothing. The technology for reproducing photographs has gotten good enough and cheap enough that suddenly images are everywhere, and people are absolutely drunk on it. For most of human history, images were rare, expensive, something you might see in a church or a wealthy person's home. Now you can buy a photograph for a halfpenny and send it across the country. This is intoxicating. But here's where it gets interesting for our purposes. Women, specifically middle-class women, have latched onto postcard collecting with particular enthusiasm. These are women who have some leisure time, a little bit of disposable income, and not a tremendous number of outlets for either. They can't vote, most of them don't work outside the home. Their social world is tightly constrained by rules about propriety and respectability. They're supposed to be decorative, accomplished in the domestic arts, capable of polite conversation but not too opinionated. And into this fairly restricted existence comes the postcard, this little rectangle of possibility, this tiny affordable art object that you can collect, organise, trade and obsess over without anyone thinking you're being unfeminine or inappropriate. You're sitting in that same parlour now watching Eleanor Pemberton carefully slip a new acquisition into her album. Her fingers are precise, gentle, the way someone handles something they actually care about. This particular postcard shows 3 kittens dressed as schoolchildren sitting at miniature desks with tiny books open in front of them. One kitten wears spectacles, another has a little bow tie. The third appears to be raising its paw as if asking a question, though really it's just a cat being a cat, captured mid-movement by a photographer with extraordinary patience and probably a fair amount of fish-based bribery. Eleanor has been collecting for 3 years now, ever since her sister sent her a postcard from Brighton featuring a cat in a bathing costume. She'd laughed at first, thought it was silly, but then she'd looked at it again later that evening and felt something shift. It was charming, yes, but it was also hers, a little piece of absurd joy that belonged to her that she could keep and look at whenever she wanted. She started asking shopkeepers if they had others. Turned out they had entire series. Cats at the seaside, cats in professions, cats having holidays. She bought a few more, then a few more. Then she mentioned it to her friend Margaret, who it turned out also collected them. And suddenly Eleanor had someone to talk to about this. Someone who understood the appeal, who didn't think she was being frivolous or childish. Margaret introduced her to 2 other women who collected, and now they meet once a month to trade duplicates and show off new finds. They have tea, obviously, because this is Edwardian England and you can't do anything without tea. But the real point is the postcards. They spread them out on the table, discuss the quality of the printing, the cleverness of the poses, the different photographers and publishers who produce them. There's Harry Whittier Fries in America, who's becoming famous for his animal photography. There's a German series everyone wants. There's rumours of new sets coming out. This isn't just about cats, though the cats are important. This is about having something that's yours, something you can control and curate and make decisions about. Eleanor's husband makes all the financial decisions. Her father made all the decisions before that. She has no legal identity separate from her husband. She can't have her own bank account in many cases. If she inherited money, it likely became her husband's property upon marriage. Her days are spent managing a household, which sounds impressive until you realise it mostly means directing servants if you're lucky enough to have them, or doing endless repetitive tasks yourself if you're not. Washing, mending, cooking, cleaning, all of it happening in cycles that repeat weekly, monthly, seasonally, forever. You wash on Monday, iron on Tuesday, mend on Wednesday. The sheets get changed, the carpets get beaten, the brass gets polished, and then you do it all again because dust and dirt and entropy never sleep. But the postcards are different. They're small enough to be manageable, affordable enough to be accessible, and socially acceptable enough that nobody thinks you're being strange or unwomanly for caring about them. You're not collecting something that makes you seem too intellectual, too political, too anything. You're collecting pictures of cats in funny outfits. It's harmless, it's charming. It's exactly the kind of innocent hobby a respectable woman might have. Except it's also giving you a space where you make the choices, where you decide what goes in the album and what doesn't, where you develop expertise and taste and opinions that matter, at least in your small circle of fellow collectors. You're building something, organising something, mastering a small domain that's entirely your own. And yes, that domain is pictures of cats dressed as humans, but honestly, you take what you can get. Eleanor slides the new postcard into its slot and steps back to admire the page. 6 cats, all in various states of scholarly dress, arranged in a pleasing composition. She feels satisfied, the same way you might feel satisfied after organising a bookshelf or finishing a puzzle. It's a small victory, a tiny assertion of order and preference in a world that doesn't ask for her preferences very often. Tomorrow she'll write to her cousin in Manchester mentioning the new acquisition, asking if her cousin has seen the series with cats in traditional Scottish dress. But for now she just looks at her album and feels, briefly, content. Let's talk about how these photographs actually get made, because it's not like cats naturally want to wear clothing and pose for cameras. You're in a photographer's studio now, probably in America because that's where Harry Whittier Fries works, and he's one of the most successful practitioners of this particular art form. The studio is cluttered with props, miniature furniture, tiny costumes, backdrops painted to look like kitchens or gardens or schoolrooms. There are lights set up, a large format camera on a heavy tripod, and somewhere in the building, probably in several buildings if we're being honest, there are cats. So many cats. You need a lot of cats for this work because cats are not cooperative subjects. They don't understand what you want from them. They don't care about your artistic vision. They are small, furry agents of chaos who would really rather be sleeping or eating or knocking things off tables. Fries has developed techniques over years of practice. First you need very young cats, kittens really, because they're smaller and more manageable and can fit into the costumes more easily. Adult cats have opinions and the physical strength to enforce those opinions. Kittens are easier to pose, though easier is relative. You build the set first, get everything arranged just right. The lighting has to be perfect because photography in 1907 requires long exposure times. The camera isn't capturing a moment, it's capturing several seconds or even minutes, which means your subject has to stay absolutely still or you get a blur. This is challenging enough with human subjects who understand what's happening. With cats, it's nearly impossible. So you pose the kitten, dress it in whatever costume the scene requires, position it carefully in the set, and then you wait. You wait for that brief window when the kitten is still, when it's not trying to escape or wash itself or attack the props, when it happens to be looking in approximately the right direction, and you trigger the shutter and hope. You take dozens of photographs to get one usable image. Maybe hundreds. The cats get tired, which actually helps because sleepy cats move less. You learn which cats have the right temperament. Some kittens are naturally calmer, more willing to sit where you put them, at least for a few seconds. You work with those. The others you send back to wherever you're keeping your reserve army of cats. Food helps, warmth helps, patience helps most of all. Fries sometimes works with his wife, who helps with the costumes and the cat wrangling. It's a 2-person operation minimum, and even then it's exhausting fiddly work that requires the temperament of a saint and the organisational skills of a military quartermaster. You need to keep track of which cats you've used, which costumes fit which sizes, which props work for which scenes. You need to develop the photographs, select the best ones, sometimes retouch them if necessary, and then get them to publishers who will reproduce them as postcards. The publishers are the ones who really make money from this. They buy the images from photographers like Frieze, print them by the thousands or tens of thousands, and distribute them to stationers and newsagents across the country. Across multiple countries, really, because the postcard craze is international. The same image might be sold in London, New York, Paris, and Berlin, with different text on the back depending on the market. The photographers get paid a fee, maybe royalties if they're lucky and have a good contract, but the real profit is in the mass production and distribution. Still, for someone like Frieze, this is a living. Not a glamorous living, not the kind of artistic photography that gets exhibited in galleries or wins prestigious awards, but a living nonetheless. He's found a niche, a market, a peculiar intersection of technology and taste and social need that happens to require photographs of cats in wedding dresses. And the wild thing is, he's not alone. There are other photographers doing similar work. There are entire studios dedicated to producing novelty postcards. The market is big enough to support multiple competitors, various styles and approaches, different niches within the niche. Some photographers specialize in dogs instead of cats. Some do rabbits or other small animals. Some create elaborate narrative scenes, whole stories told across a series of cards. Others keep it simple, just a single animal in a single costume, letting the inherent absurdity do the work. You're back in England now, in a small shop on a high street in a town that's probably somewhere in the Midlands. The shop sells stationery, newspapers, tobacco, small sundries, the kinds of things people need regularly enough to keep a business running. Near the front counter there's a rotating wire rack filled with postcards, hundreds of them, organised by category. Scenic views on one side, comic cards on another, greetings and sentiments in the middle, and there on the bottom tier where you have to crouch slightly to see them properly, the animal cards. You're a woman named Alice Hartley and you've come in specifically to see if they've gotten anything new. The shopkeeper knows you by now, knows you collect the cat cards, and he's set aside a few he thought you might like. This is customer service in 1907, this personal attention, this remembering what your regulars want. The shop isn't just a place to buy things, it's a social space. A place where you exchange pleasantries and local gossip along with your coins. The shopkeeper produces 4 cards from under the counter, already separated from the general stock because he knew you'd be in. 2 of them you already have, part of a series you completed months ago, but the other 2 are new. One shows a cat dressed as a postman, which feels appropriately meta. A postcard about delivering postcards. The other is more elaborate, 3 cats having a tea party with tiny cups and saucers and a miniature teapot, all properly arranged on a lace tablecloth. The cats are wearing dresses with actual fabric texture visible in the photograph, and one of them has a hat with a flower on it. You can see the effort that went into this, the staging, the costume work, the patience required to get 3 cats to sit still simultaneously. You buy both cards, along with a few plain ones for actual correspondence, and you walk home feeling that small lift of satisfaction that comes from adding to a collection. When you get home, you sit down at your writing desk and really look at the tea party card. There's something about it that appeals to you beyond just the novelty. It's the domesticity of it maybe, this miniature performance of the exact kind of social ritual you participate in regularly. You have tea with friends, with neighbours, with relatives who visit. You pour from actual teapots into actual cups, and you talk about acceptable topics in acceptable ways. And you perform femininity as it's understood in your particular class and time period. And here are these cats, dressed up and posed in a parody of that same ritual, except they don't know they're performing. They're just cats who happen to be still for long enough to be photographed. There's something funny about it, yes, but also something oddly poignant. The gap between the human clothes and accessories and the fundamental catness of the subjects creates a strange tension, a reminder that we dress things up and impose meanings on them, but underneath it all, a cat is still a cat, indifferent to our social constructions. You're not thinking about it in exactly those terms, obviously. You don't have the vocabulary of semiotics or performance theory, but you feel something when you look at the card, something more than just amusement. It's touching in a way that's hard to articulate. These dressed-up cats are absurd, but they're also sweet, innocent, a little bit sad in their complete lack of awareness about what's being done to them. They're not complicit in the joke. They're just there, being cats, while humans project entire narratives onto them. And maybe that's part of the appeal, this combination of humour and tenderness, this way of looking at something small and powerless and finding it precious rather than pathetic. In a world that can be hard and judgmental and full of rules about proper behaviour, there's something genuinely comforting about pictures of cats who don't know they're breaking any rules because they don't know there are rules to begin with. You add the card to your album, which is less extensive than Eleanor Pemberton's but still substantial. You've been collecting for about a year and you have maybe 50 or 60 cards so far, all carefully preserved and organised. You don't have a particular system like some collectors do. You're not sorting by photographer or theme or colour scheme. You just put them in the order you acquired them, so the album becomes a kind of diary, a record of your visits to the shop, your small purchases, your tiny accumulations of beauty and whimsy. Sometimes you page through the album in the evening after dinner when your husband is reading his newspaper and the house has settled into its nightly quiet. You don't show him the album. He knows you collect postcards, finds it harmless enough, but you don't share it with him. This is yours. Let's step back and think about why cats specifically become such popular subjects for this treatment. You could dress up any animal, theoretically, dogs, rabbits, hamsters, birds if you were feeling particularly ambitious. And people do photograph other animals in costumes, but cats dominate the market in a way that suggests something deeper is going on. You're in the collective imagination of Edwardian society now, trying to understand what cats mean to people, what they represent, why they work so well as subjects for this particular kind of anthropomorphic photography. Cats have a specific cultural position in this era. They're domestic animals, obviously, kept in homes as companions and pest control, but they're not quite domesticated in the way dogs are. Dogs are loyal, obedient, eager to please, transparent in their emotions and desires. They're good dogs, and you can call them that without irony. Cats are different. Cats are independent, aloof, mysterious. They live in your house, but they don't seem to need you the way a dog needs you. They come and go as they please, or they would if you let them. They have their own agendas, their own interior lives that remain opaque no matter how long you observe them. This makes them perfect for anthropomorphization because they already seem like they're keeping secrets. When you dress a dog in human clothes, the dog looks confused or ashamed, or like it's tolerating this indignity out of loyalty to you. When you dress a cat in human clothes, the cat looks dignified, almost as if it chose to wear the outfit, as if it has reasons you couldn't possibly understand. There's a natural comedy in the disconnect between a cat's serious demeanor and the absurdity of whatever costume it's wearing. The cat maintains its composure even while dressed as a bride or a sea captain, and that composure is inherently funny. It's the same mechanism that makes deadpan humor work. The contrast between the situation and the reaction creates the comedy. Cats are natural deadpan comedians because they refuse to acknowledge that anything unusual is happening. They simply exist in whatever circumstances they find themselves with perfect self-possession. But there's more to it than just comedy. Cats also represent a kind of domestic femininity that resonates with the women who are collecting these postcards. Cats are associated with home, with hearth and comfort, with the private sphere rather than the public one. They're indoor creatures mostly, especially in middle-class households where cats are pets rather than working animals. They occupy the same space as women occupy, the parlors and bedrooms and kitchens, the domestic realm that is supposedly women's natural domain. When you photograph cats performing human activities, you're often photographing them performing domestic activities specifically. Cats having tea, cats doing needlework, cats caring for baby cats, cats engaged in all the tasks that define women's work in this era. There's an identification happening, a recognition. These cats are us, the collectors might think, or at least they're performing a version of us, a miniature, simplified, somehow more honest version, because cats can't pretend to enjoy these activities, they just endure them, and there's something both funny and true about that. At the same time, the cats maintain their catness, their fundamental otherness, and that provides distance and safety. You can project onto them without it feeling too direct, too revealing. If you collected photographs of women doing domestic tasks, that might feel uncomfortably close to reality, to the actual constraints and expectations of your life. But cats doing these things, that's fantasy, play, harmless fun. You can acknowledge the absurdity of the performance without having to acknowledge the absurdity of your own life. The cats become a kind of safety valve, a way to look at your daily existence from a slight angle, with just enough distortion to make it bearable, even amusing. Look at this cat in an apron pretending to cook. Isn't that silly? Isn't that sweet? And you can laugh without having to think too hard about the fact that you spend hours every day in an actual apron, actually cooking, with no photographer around to turn it into art or comedy. The Edwardian era is also a time when attitudes toward animals are shifting, when pets are becoming more sentimentalized, more anthropomorphized in daily life, not just in photographs. The middle class has enough prosperity to keep animals purely for companionship rather than utility. Cats and dogs become family members, given names and personalities and emotional significance. People talk to their pets, attribute thoughts and feelings to them, create narratives about their behavior. The cat isn't just catching mice, she's clever, she's proud, she has preferences and opinions. This everyday anthropomorphization makes the dressed-up cat photographs feel like a natural extension of how people already think about their animals. Of course the cat could wear clothes and have tea, because we already imagine our cats having complex inner lives and social relationships. The photographs just make that imagination visible, literal, concrete. You're in a parlor again, different house this time, and it's 1909 now, a couple of years deeper into the postcard craze. The woman sitting by the window is named Catherine Morrison, and she's writing in a small notebook, cataloguing her collection. She has over 200 cat postcards at this point, and the album can't hold them all anymore, so she's had to buy a second one, and now she's created an index system so she can find specific cards when she wants them. She's organized them by theme first, then by photographer when she knows who took the image, then by date of acquisition for everything else. This level of organization might seem excessive for postcards of cats in clothes, but Catherine doesn't see it that way. She sees it as proper stewardship of a collection, the same care and attention you'd give to anything worth preserving. She's thought about this actually, about why she does it, why it matters to her. In her more philosophical moments, usually late at night when she can't sleep, she thinks about how most of what she does in life leaves no trace. She cooks meals that get eaten, she cleans rooms that get dirty again, she mends clothes that wear out eventually anyway. Everything is temporary, circular, consumed by time and use and the daily entropy of living. But the postcards remain, they're permanent, or as permanent as anything can be. They're physical objects she can organize and preserve and potentially pass down to someone, though she's not sure who would want them. Her daughter perhaps, if her daughter develops an interest, though right now her daughter is only 8 and more interested in dolls than postcards. Still, the point is they last. They're evidence of her time, her choices, her particular enthusiasms. In 100 years, someone might find these albums and wonder about the woman who collected them. They might not understand why she cared, but they'd know she did care, that she devoted time and thought and small amounts of money to assembling this particular collection. That feels important to Catherine in a way she can't quite articulate. It's about leaving something behind, some proof of individual taste and personality in a life that otherwise might be entirely absorbed into the generic category of wife, mother, homemaker, woman. She's also part of a postcard exchange club now, a more formal arrangement than Eleanor's casual group of friends. The club has 12 members, all women, and they meet monthly at different houses. They have dues, a treasurer, a president who manages the meeting schedule. They've developed rules for trading. If you want someone else's card, you have to offer something of equal value, and value is determined by rarity, condition, and desirability, which are all subjective, but they've developed a rough consensus over time. German cards are highly valued because they're harder to obtain and often have better color printing. American cards are common, but some photographers are more desirable than others. British cards are plentiful, but quality varies wildly. There are hierarchies, systems, a whole economy in miniature operating in these monthly gatherings. The women negotiate, persuade, sometimes argue gently about what constitutes a fair trade. It's practice for a kind of agency and decision-making they don't often get to exercise in the rest of their lives. In here they're equals. In here what they think about a postcard's value actually matters. Catherine finishes her cataloguing and closes the notebook with satisfaction. She has a card she's planning to offer in trade at next week's meeting, a duplicate from a series she completed, and she knows at least 2 other members want it. She'll have to decide who to trade with, what to ask for in return. She's thinking about it already, weighing her options, considering strategy. Is it better to trade with Margaret, who has a rare German card Catherine wants, or with Alice, who has several cards that would help Catherine complete a different series? There's genuine pleasure in this decision-making, this small exercise of preference and judgment. Her husband makes decisions about money, property, investments, the big things that shape their life. But she makes decisions about postcards, and within the bounded world of her hobby, those decisions matter. They have consequences, create outcomes, build something according to her vision of what the collection should be. Outside the window, rain is starting, that persistent English drizzle that can last for days. Catherine lights a lamp as the room grows darker. She'll spend the evening with her albums, maybe reorganize a few pages, definitely admire some favorite cards. Her husband will come home from his office, eat the dinner she's prepared, read his newspaper, maybe talk about his day if it was interesting. She'll listen, comment appropriately, perform her role as attentive wife. But part of her mind will be on the postcards, on next week's meeting, on the endless pleasant puzzle of what to acquire next, how to improve the collection, where to find that one card that's been eluding her for months. It's a small obsession, a tiny passion, but it's hers. Let's talk about the economics of all this, because nothing exists in a vacuum, and the postcard craze is ultimately a commercial phenomenon driven by profit and market forces. You're in a publisher's office in London, a cramped room filled with samples and proofs and stacks of cardboard waiting to be printed. The publisher, let's call him Mr. Thomas Graves, is looking at photographs submitted by various sources, trying to decide what to print next. He has to think about costs, about what will sell, about trends in the market. Printing postcards isn't expensive per unit once you've got the setup done, but there are upfront costs. You need to make printing plates, choose paper stock, decide on quantities. If you print too few and something becomes popular, you miss out on potential profit. If you print too many and something doesn't sell, you're stuck with inventory taking up warehouse space. Graves has been in this business for 5 years now, long enough to develop instincts about what works. Animal cards always sell reasonably well. They're safe choices, broadly appealing, appropriate for all ages, nothing scandalous or political about a cat in a wedding dress. You can sell them to children, to elderly ladies, to anyone really. They make good gifts, good additions to collections, good casual purchases when someone's just browsing. The profit margin isn't huge on any individual card, maybe a fraction of a penny after costs, but volume makes up for it. If you sell 50,000 copies of a card, those fractions add up to actual money. Graves is looking at a set of new cat photographs now, trying to decide if they're worth producing. The photographs are well executed, clear focus, good lighting, the costumes are charming. But are they different enough from what's already on the market? He's seen dozens of cats having tea parties, hundreds probably. What makes these particular cats having a tea party worth printing? He looks closer. One of the cats is wearing spectacles, that's good, adds character. The teapot is unusually detailed, actually decorative rather than just a plain miniature. The composition is slightly better than average, the cat's positioned in a way that creates depth and interest rather than just being lined up in a row. He decides to take a chance on them, contracts for the photographs, sends them to the printer with specifications. The cards will be ready in 2 weeks, distributed to his network of retailers throughout England and possibly Scotland if the first run does well. He prices them at the standard rate, halfpenny each or 6 for 2p if bought in sets. The retailers will mark them up slightly, make their own small profit. Everyone in the chain makes a little money, not enough to get wealthy from, but enough to justify continued production. This is how the system works, how it sustains itself. As long as women keep collecting, keep buying, keep trading and organizing and caring about these small printed rectangles, the whole ecosystem continues. The photographers take pictures, the publishers print cards, the retailers stock them, the collectors buy them, and money circulates through this strange little economy built on dressed-up cats. Graves has noticed that collections themselves drive ongoing purchases. Someone who buys their first cat postcard casually might buy their second one just because they liked the first. By the third or fourth, they're not buying individual cards anymore, they're building a collection, which means they're now in the market for every new card that comes out. They want complete sets, rare examples, variations on themes they already have. The psychology of collecting kicks in, that need for completion, for comprehensiveness, for having the best or most complete example of whatever you're collecting. This is incredibly good for business because it creates repeat customers, people who will come back again and again, who will actively seek out new releases, who will pay attention to which publishers produce which types of cards. Brand loyalty develops. Catherine Morrison, if she saw a new card from a publisher whose work she admires, would buy it almost automatically, trusting that the quality will be consistent with previous examples. The market is competitive though, there are multiple publishers doing similar things, all trying to capture the same customer base. You have to keep producing new content, new variations, new spins on popular themes. Just reprinting the same cats in the same poses won't work indefinitely. Collectors want novelty within familiarity. They want cards that fit into their existing collections but also expand them, add something new. It's a delicate balance, giving people more of what they already like without boring them with exact repetition. Graves thinks about this constantly, trying to anticipate what will feel fresh enough to be exciting but similar enough to be collectible. Sometimes he gets it right and a card sells exceptionally well. Sometimes he miscalculates and ends up with boxes of unsold stock. It's not an exact science, this business of manufacturing desire for images of cats in costumes. You're at a railway station now, somewhere in the north of England, maybe Manchester or Leeds, one of those industrial cities where the air always smells faintly of coal smoke and the buildings are already darkening from soot even though they're relatively new. It's a Tuesday afternoon in 1910, and a woman named Florence Kettering is waiting for her train. She has 45 minutes before it arrives, so she wanders into the station's bookstall, one of those convenient little shops that exist in the liminal spaces of travel, selling newspapers and magazines and cheap novels and postcards. So many postcards. The station bookstalls are actually major distribution points for postcards because travellers buy them impulsively, want something to send home or to friends, want to mark their journey with some small communication. Florence isn't travelling for pleasure, she's been visiting her sister who's been ill, and the visit was difficult and sad and she's exhausted from it. But she finds herself browsing the postcard rack anyway, letting her eyes drift over the images, looking for nothing in particular. She stops at a card showing a kitten dressed as a nurse, complete with a tiny white cap and apron, holding what appears to be a miniature medicine bottle. Something about it catches her. The earnest expression on the kitten's face, or what she reads as earnestness though it's probably just the cat being a cat. The careful detail of the costume, the absurd sweetness of the whole concept. She buys it, along with 2 plain cards for actual correspondence, and she puts the nurse kitten in her handbag, thinking maybe she'll add it to her small collection at home, or maybe she'll send it to her sister. A small gesture of comfort, a way of saying I hope you feel better without having to find the right words for that sentiment. Postcards can do that sometimes, carry meanings that are hard to articulate in plain text. The image does the emotional work, and you can just write something brief and inadequate on the back and trust that the person receiving it will understand the fuller message. This impulse purchase, this small transaction in a railway station bookstall, is replicated thousands of times a day across Britain. People buying postcards in odd moments, in between other activities, not because they plan to, but because the cards are there and they're cheap and there's something appealing about them. The infrastructure of distribution is what makes the whole phenomenon possible. Postcards have to be everywhere, constantly available, easy to buy on a whim. If you had to go to a specialty shop or order them in advance, the market would be a fraction of the size. But because they're in railway stations and post offices and corner shops and stationers and newsagents, because you encounter them constantly in the course of normal life, they become part of the background texture of existence. You can buy a postcard as easily as you can buy a newspaper or a packet of pins. This ubiquity feeds the collecting impulse because you never know when you might encounter a card you need or want, so you develop a habit of checking, of browsing, of being alert to possibilities. Florence boards her train when it arrives, finds a seat in a second-class carriage, settles in for the journey home. She takes out the nurse kitten postcard and looks at it again. She decides she'll keep it rather than send it. Her sister wouldn't understand anyway, might think it frivolous or strange, but Florence understands, or at least she feels something when she looks at it, something about care and tenderness and the desire to help even when you're small and powerless and not actually equipped for the task. The kitten can't really be a nurse, can't heal anyone or ease suffering, but it's dressed for the role, performing a kind of symbolic care. Florence has just spent 3 days trying to care for her sister, trying to be useful and comforting, and mostly feeling inadequate to the enormity of illness and suffering. The kitten somehow captures that feeling, that gap between intention and capability, between what you want to do and what you can actually accomplish. Or maybe she's reading too much into a photograph of a cat in a costume. Maybe it's just cute and that's enough. The train rocks gently as it picks up speed, moving through the industrial outskirts of the city into the countryside beyond. Florence watches the landscape change, fields and stone walls and distant sheep. The eternal English pastoral that exists alongside and somehow despite the factories and railways and all the machinery of modernity. She holds the postcard carefully, not wanting to bend or crease it. When she gets home, she'll add it to the small box where she keeps the handful of postcards she's accumulated over the past year. She doesn't have an album, hasn't committed to collecting in any serious way, but she has these few cards that meant something to her for reasons she can't always explain. The nurse kitten will join them, this small record of a difficult day, a moment of grace in a railway station bookstall, a tiny beautiful absurdity that made her feel slightly less alone. Let's drift across the Atlantic for a moment because the postcard craze isn't uniquely British, it's happening in America too with its own variations and emphases. You're in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place that has one main street and a few churches and everyone knows everyone else's business whether they want to or not. The year is still 1910 and a young woman named Ruth Holloway is working in her father's general store, which sells everything from fabric to farming equipment to, yes, postcards. The postcards are displayed near the front counter, easy to browse while you're waiting for your order to be filled or your parcels to be wrapped. Ruth restocks them regularly, noting which ones sell quickly and which ones linger. The comic cards move fast, anything with a joke or a pun or a pratfall. The scenic views sell steadily to people who want to send proof of where they live to relatives elsewhere. And the animal cards, especially the cats, those sell to a specific clientele, mostly women, mostly middle-aged or older, mostly the ones who have enough money for small luxuries. Ruth has started collecting them herself, though she's only 19 and theoretically should be interested in other things, more serious things, practical things. Her mother thinks it's childish, this interest in pictures of dressed-up animals, but her mother thinks most things Ruth does are slightly wrong or disappointing in some vague way. Ruth doesn't care. She likes the postcards. She likes how they're small and contained and complete, how you can possess them entirely for just a penny. She can't possess much else in her life. She lives in her parents' house, works in her father's store, is expected to marry someone appropriate eventually and then move into that person's house and work in that domestic sphere instead. The future is mapped out with very little room for deviation, but the postcards are hers, chosen by her, arranged by her, a small territory of autonomy in an otherwise predetermined existence. American postcards are slightly different from British ones. The printing quality varies more widely, from very fine German imports to locally produced cards that are sometimes crude, overcoloured, the images slightly blurry or poorly composed. There's more entrepreneurial chaos in the American market, more small publishers trying to make a quick profit, less standardization of quality and format. This means you have to be more discerning as a collector, more careful about what you buy, because not everything is worth keeping. Ruth has learned to spot good printing, good photography, good costume work. She's developed an eye for quality even though she's never articulated the criteria she's using. She just knows when something is well done, when the photographer has taken real care, when the image has that particular charm that makes it worth preserving. She's also learned that collecting connects you to other people in unexpected ways. There's an older woman who comes into the store every Saturday, Mrs. Brennan, who also collects cat postcards, and now when she comes in, she and Ruth have something to talk about beyond the weather and the price of flour. They compare notes on new arrivals, discuss which photographers they prefer, trade duplicates sometimes. It's a small connection, nothing dramatic or life-changing, but it's pleasant. It makes Ruth's workdays less tedious. She's stuck behind this counter 6 days a week, measuring out sugar and wrapping packages and making change and being polite to customers who don't always deserve politeness. And the postcards give her something to think about, something to look forward to, a reason to pay attention when new stock arrives from the wholesaler. Her collection is still small, maybe 30 cards, but she has ambitions for it. She's seen pictures in magazines of elaborate postcard albums, multiple volumes, collections that number in the hundreds. She's not sure she'll ever achieve anything like that, mostly because postcards cost money and she doesn't have much money, only what her father pays her for working in the store, and that's not much because why would he pay her well when she lives at home and all her wages would just go back into the household anyway? But she saves what she can, sets aside a few pennies each week, and periodically she selects a new card to add to her collection. The choosing is part of the pleasure. She could buy cards impulsively, grab whatever looks nice in the moment, but she doesn't. She considers carefully, thinks about what she already has, what would complement the existing collection, what brings her genuine joy rather than just momentary interest. This discipline, this thoughtfulness feels important. It's practice for something, though she's not sure what. Making decisions, trusting her own judgment, building something intentionally rather than letting it happen randomly. Outside the store window, Main Street is quiet in the afternoon heat. A horse and wagon pass by slowly, raising dust. Someone's dog is sleeping on the sidewalk in the shade. Ruth straightens the postcard display, making sure the cat cards are prominently featured, easily visible to anyone who comes in. She's become protective of them, these small printed images that mean more to her than they probably should. They're just postcards, just cats in clothes, just a silly hobby. But they're also proof that she exists, that she has preferences and passions, that there's an interior life happening beneath the surface of her daily routines. The postcards know this somehow, they keep her secrets. You're in a printing facility now, somewhere in Germany, probably Dresden or one of the other cities known for producing high-quality chromolithography. The year is 1908, and you're watching the process by which a photograph of a cat in a sailor suit becomes a postcard that will eventually end up in someone's album thousands of miles away. The process is more complex than you might think, more hands-on than the word printing suggests. First, someone has to transfer the photographic image onto lithographic stones or metal plates, one plate for each colour that will be printed. This requires skill and precision, the ability to separate a full colour image into its component colours, usually 4 to 6 different plates depending on how elaborate the final product needs to be. Each plate will print one colour, and when all the colours are layered correctly, the result approximates the original photograph, or at least creates a convincing enough reproduction that most people won't notice the difference. The German printers are considered the best at this, which is why their postcards command premium prices in the collecting market. They use better paper, better inks, more colour separations, more attention to registration, which is the technical term for getting all the different colour layers to align perfectly. When registration is off, you get blurry edges, colours that don't quite meet, a generally muddy appearance. When it's done right, the image is crisp and vibrant, colours distinct but harmonious, details clear even in small scale. The German postcards have this quality, this refinement that makes them immediately distinguishable from cheaper alternatives. Collectors know this, covet them, trade multiple common cards for a single good German example. The printers know they're producing something that people value beyond mere functionality, that these aren't just disposable printed matter but objects that will be kept, treasured, preserved in albums for years or decades. The actual printing happens on large flatbed presses, sheets of cardstock fed through one at a time, each sheet receiving one colour per pass through the press. So if you're printing a card that uses 6 colours, each sheet goes through the press 6 times, and each time it has to be aligned precisely with the previous colours or the whole thing is ruined. It's slow work, exacting work, the kind of thing that requires experienced pressmen who understand the machinery, the paper, the ink, all the variables that can affect the final result. Humidity matters, temperature matters, the pressure applied by the press matters. You're trying to achieve consistency across thousands of copies, and that's harder than it sounds. The first 100 prints might be perfect, and then something shifts. The paper starts feeding slightly differently. The ink consistency changes as it sits, and suddenly you're getting inferior results. The pressmen have to monitor constantly, make tiny adjustments, stay alert to problems before they ruin too many sheets. After printing, the sheets have to be cut into individual postcards, their backs printed with the standard postal format, lines for address and message, whatever publisher's mark or identification is required. Then they're packaged, bundled into sets for distribution to wholesalers who will ship them to retailers across Europe and America and anywhere else the postcard market has taken hold. The whole process from photograph to finished product takes weeks, involves dozens of workers at different stages, requires coordination across multiple facilities and companies. And all of this industrial effort, all this technical skill and logistical complexity, is devoted to producing images of cats in human clothing. If you said this out loud, described the system in these terms, it would sound absurd. An entire sector of international manufacturing and trade organized around novelty photographs. But that's what it is, and it employs people, generates profit, satisfies demand that is real even if the product seems frivolous. The German printing house you're observing produces postcards for multiple publishers, works from photographs sourced from photographers in several countries. They're not making artistic decisions about content, they're executing technical processes to reproduce whatever images they're contracted to print. But there's still craftsmanship involved, still pride in doing the work well. The master printer walking between the presses knows good work when he sees it, can spot problems immediately, takes satisfaction in sheets that come out perfectly aligned and coloured. He's been doing this for 20 years, learned the trade as an apprentice, worked his way up through the hierarchy of the print shop. He doesn't think much about what happens to the postcards after they leave the facility, where they end up, who buys them, why anyone cares. That's not his concern. His concern is the quality of the printing, the consistency of the output, meeting the specifications laid out in the contract. But in some indirect way, his skill and attention are what make collecting possible, what make the postcards worth collecting in the first place. If they were poorly printed, blurry, inconsistent, the whole phenomenon might not have taken hold. Quality matters, even for something as seemingly trivial as postcards of dressed-up cats. You're back in England, in a middle-class home in a suburb of Birmingham, and it's a rainy evening in 1911. The woman of the house, let's call her Margaret Ashworth, is hosting the monthly meeting of her postcard exchange group. There are 7 women present, sitting in the parlour with tea and biscuits, their postcard albums spread across every available surface. The room smells like damp wool and coal fire and the particular mustiness that English houses develop when it rains for days straight. The women are talking, but not about anything consequential, not about politics or religion or any of the topics that might create actual tension. They're talking about postcards, which is safe, which everyone present cares about, which creates a sense of shared purpose without requiring them to agree on anything more significant than whether a particular card is worth trading. Margaret has been collecting for 4 years now, has amassed nearly 300 cards, all cats, all in costumes or posed in human scenarios. Her albums are beautifully maintained, the cards slipped into protective corners, each one positioned carefully on the page. She's arranged them thematically, with sections for domestic scenes, professional occupations, holiday celebrations, and what she privately thinks of as the artistic category, cards that are particularly well composed or unusual in some way. This organisation has taken considerable thought and gets reorganised periodically when she decides her previous system wasn't quite right. Her husband thinks she's slightly mad, all this effort devoted to postcards, but he doesn't interfere. It keeps her occupied, keeps her happy, costs relatively little, creates no social embarrassment. These are the criteria by which husbands judge their wives' hobbies in 1911, and Margaret's collecting passes on all counts. Tonight's meeting has a particular energy because one of the women, Elizabeth, has recently returned from a trip to London and brought back cards that aren't available in Birmingham yet. New releases from a publisher everyone likes, featuring cats in motoring outfits, which is very current, very now, because automobiles are becoming more common and motoring is fashionable. The cats are dressed in dusters and goggles, posed in or around miniature automobiles, and the whole thing captures something about the moment, about modernity and speed and progress, but filtered through this lens of whimsy that makes it palatable, non-threatening. The women gather around Elizabeth's cards, admiring them, and immediately several of them want to trade for duplicates. Elizabeth brought extras anticipating this, and now the real business of the evening begins, the negotiation of trades. This is where it gets interesting, where you can see social dynamics playing out in miniature. Who has status in this group? Whose opinion matters? Who defers to whom? Margaret, as the hostess and as the person with the largest collection, has a certain authority. When she says a card is particularly desirable, others tend to agree. Elizabeth has temporary elevated status because she has the new cards everyone wants. The other women have to position themselves carefully, have to offer things of sufficient value to make Elizabeth want to trade, have to negotiate without seeming too desperate or too aggressive. There are unspoken rules about fairness, about not taking advantage, about maintaining the social harmony that makes these gatherings pleasant. You can't demand too much for a card even if you know someone really wants it. You can't refuse a fair trade just to be difficult. You have to participate in the fiction that this is all friendly and cooperative, even though there's real competition happening, real calculation about value and desire and who gets what. The trades happen slowly, with much discussion and examination of cards. 2 women agree to swap duplicates from a series they're both collecting. Another trade involves 3 cards changing hands, a more complex negotiation that requires everyone to verify that it's equitable charitable. Margaret trades one of her German cards for two of Elizabeth's motoring cats, which seems like she's giving up more value, but actually she has several examples from that German series and really wants the motoring cats, and this is her gathering, so there's a subtle expectation that she should be accommodated. No one says this explicitly, but everyone understands it. The social machinery operates smoothly, lubricated by tea and politeness and shared enthusiasm. By the end of the evening, most of the women have acquired at least one new card, and everyone leaves feeling satisfied, feeling like the evening was worthwhile, feeling connected to this small community of collectors who understand why this matters. Margaret sees them out, then returns to the parlour to clean up the tea things and gather the albums. Her husband pokes his head in, asks how it went, and she says it went well, and he nods and retreats to his study. Margaret sits for a moment alone in the parlour looking at her new acquisitions, the motoring cats that will need to be integrated into her collection, which might require reorganising an entire album. She feels content, purposeful, like she spent her evening doing something meaningful even though she knows most people wouldn't understand that meaning. But she doesn't need most people to understand. She only needs the 7 women who are here tonight, who get it, who share this strange small passion. That's enough. You're in a photographer's studio in Boston now watching Harry Whittier freeze work, because if we're going to understand this phenomenon fully, we need to spend more time with the person actually creating these images. It's early morning, the best time for natural light, though Freeze supplements it with artificial lighting when necessary. He's been at this for years now, has developed systems and workflows that make the process as efficient as possible, though efficient is relative when you're trying to photograph cats. Today he's working on a new series, Cats as Schoolchildren, which requires multiple setups, multiple costumes, multiple cats obviously, because no single cat will cooperate long enough to create an entire series. He has about a dozen kittens available today, borrowed from various sources, local families who know he needs cats and are willing to lend them for a few hours in exchange for small payments, or sometimes just free postcards once the images are printed. The studio is organised chaos. There's a miniature schoolroom set up in one corner, complete with tiny desks and a small chalkboard and books scaled down to kitten size. The costumes are laid out on a table, little jackets and dresses and caps, all sewn by Freeze's wife, who has become expert at creating garments for very small, very uncooperative subjects. The trick is making them easy to put on and take off, because you only have a few minutes of patience from any given kitten before it decides it's done with this nonsense and needs to be somewhere else immediately. The costumes can't have too many buttons or complicated fastenings. They need to stay on but not bind or restrict movement too much, because a visibly uncomfortable cat doesn't photograph well. You want the cat to look natural, or as natural as possible given that it's wearing a tiny suit and sitting at a tiny desk. Freeze starts with the calmest kitten, a grey tabby that seems unusually tolerant of being handled. He and his wife dress it in a little jacket and cap, position it at one of the desks, place a small book in front of it. The kitten sits there, mostly still, looking around with that vague unfocused interest cats have when nothing particularly urgent is happening. Freeze adjusts the lighting, checks the composition through the camera, waits for the right moment. The kitten turns its head, looks roughly toward the camera, and Freeze triggers the shutter. The exposure takes several seconds. The kitten stays still enough, mostly, though there's probably some slight blur if you look closely. But that's fine. Most postcards will be printed small enough that minor imperfections won't be visible. He takes several more photographs with the same setup, trying different angles, different lighting, making sure he has options when it comes time to select the best image for printing. Then it's on to the next cat, the next costume, the next setup. This one is supposed to be a teacher, standing at the chalkboard with a pointer. This is more challenging because standing is harder than sitting, requires more active cooperation from the cat. Freeze has tricks though. You can use wires hidden behind the set to help support the cat in position. You can wait until the cat naturally stands to look at something, then quickly trigger the shutter. You can take dozens of photographs knowing most will be unusable but hoping one or two will work. Photography at this stage in its development is still partly about luck, about being ready when the moment happens rather than being able to manufacture the moment entirely. You set up the conditions for success, and then you wait, patient and alert, for the cat to accidentally do what you want it to do. By mid-morning, Freeze has worked through 6 cats and gotten maybe a dozen usable photographs. That's actually a good ratio. Some days are worse, some days the cats are too energetic or too sleepy or too interested in attacking the props. Some days the light isn't right, or the costumes don't fit properly, or something technical goes wrong with the camera or the chemicals, or any of the 100 things that can go wrong in the complicated process of photography. But today's going well. The cats have been reasonably cooperative, the setups have worked, the technical execution has been clean. Freeze feels satisfied, the way any craftsman feels when the work is going smoothly, when skill and preparation are paying off in results that meet his standards. He'll spend the afternoon developing the negatives, an entirely different set of skills and equipment, a whole other room of the studio dedicated to the chemical processes that turn exposed film into actual images. Then he'll make contact prints, evaluate them, select the best ones to send to publishers. The publishers will make their own decisions about what to actually produce, but Freeze has learned to anticipate what they want, what will sell, what fits into the current market. The schoolroom series will do well, he thinks. Educational themes are popular, children always sell, and cats as children hit multiple appealing notes at once. By this time next year, these photographs he's taking today will be in albums across America and Britain, looked at by women who have no idea how they were made, who imagine the process was probably simple and quick, who don't think about the patience and skill required to capture a cat in a costume looking even remotely natural. You're in a village in rural Somerset now, a place so small it barely qualifies as a village, just a cluster of houses around a church and a post office that's also someone's front room. The year is 1912, and the woman who runs the post office, whose name is Jane Wickham, has started stocking a small selection of postcards because people keep asking for them. She orders them from a wholesaler in Bristol, just a few dozen at a time, whatever assortment the wholesaler sends. She doesn't have control over exactly what she receives, but she can indicate preferences, and she's noticed that the cat postcards sell particularly well, so she started requesting more of those. The women in the village buy them, not in great quantities because this is a poor area and people don't have money for frivolities, but steadily enough that Jane keeps them in stock. One of her regular customers is a woman named Sarah Dunn, who lives in a cottage at the edge of the village and works as a laundress, taking in washing from the larger houses in the area. Sarah has almost no money, spends her days bent over tubs of hot water, scrubbing other people's sheets and shirts and undergarments, hanging them to dry, ironing them with heavy irons heated on the stove. It's brutal work, physically exhausting. Her hands are always red and rough despite the lard she rubs into them at night. But once a month, when she's done her accounts and paid for her necessities and has a few pennies left over, she allows herself to buy a postcard. Just one. She can't afford more than that. She chooses carefully, spends time looking through Jane's limited selection, considering her options. She's drawn to the cat cards, always has been. Something about them appeals to her in a way the scenic views or the comic cards don't. She doesn't have an album to keep them in. Albums cost money she doesn't have. Instead, she keeps her postcards in a tin box that used to contain tea, a pretty tin with flowers painted on it that she's repurposed for this new use. She has maybe 15 postcards in there now, accumulated over more than a year of careful monthly purchases. Sometimes when she's finished her work for the day, when the last of the ironing is done and put away and she's too tired to do anything else, she takes out the tin box and looks through the cards. She doesn't think of herself as a collector exactly. Collecting sounds like something wealthy people do, something that requires resources and leisure she doesn't have. But she has these cards, she's chosen them deliberately, she derives pleasure from them, so maybe that is collecting after all, just a smaller, poorer version of what women like Margaret Ashworth or Catherine Morrison do. Sarah's favourite card shows a cat dressed as a washerwoman, wearing an apron and standing next to a miniature wash tub. She bought it 6 months ago and has looked at it probably hundreds of times since. There's something about it that feels personal, like the card is speaking directly to her experience, acknowledging her work in a way nothing else in her life does. The cat looks tired, or she reads tiredness into its expression, projects her own exhaustion onto this small photographed animal. She knows it's just a cat in a costume, knows the cat wasn't actually doing laundry, wasn't actually tired from labour, but the image creates a connection anyway, lets her feel seen in some small way, even if the seeing is entirely in her own imagination. When she looks at this card, she thinks, yes, that's me, that's what I do. And somehow that acknowledgement, even from a postcard of a cat, matters. It validates her work, her existence, the daily grind that nobody else notices or cares about. She would never articulate any of this to anyone. If someone asked why she collects cat postcards, she'd probably say she just likes them. They're pretty. They make her smile. And those things are true too. But underneath the simple explanation is this deeper need for recognition, for connection, for evidence that her life and work have some kind of meaning or value beyond pure survival. The postcards give her that, in their small odd way. They cost almost nothing, but they provide something she can't get anywhere else. A moment of beauty and whimsy and self-recognition in days that are otherwise entirely consumed by labour and exhaustion. Jane at the post office knows Sarah buys postcards regularly, has noticed her deliberation in choosing them, the care with which she handles them. Jane doesn't know about the tin box or what the cards mean to Sarah, but she makes sure to set aside new cat cards when they come in, mentions them to Sarah when she comes in for stamps or to mail letters for the household she works for. It's a small kindness, this attention to a customer's preferences, but it matters. Sarah appreciates it, feels valued in this tiny way, this acknowledgement that someone has noticed what she likes, what brings her pleasure. In a life that offers very few pleasures, that's significant. You're in a doctor's waiting room in Edinburgh, Scotland, and it's 1913 now, winter, dark by 4 in the afternoon, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. A woman named Helen Crawford is sitting on a hard wooden chair, waiting to see the physician about a persistent cough that won't go away. She's nervous, not just about the cough, but about being here at all, about the cost of the consultation, about what the doctor might say. To distract herself, she's looking at the postcards displayed in a small frame on the wall. The doctor's wife has arranged them there, a decorative touch meant to make the waiting room less austere, more welcoming. Most of them are scenic views of Edinburgh, the castle and Princes Street and the Forth Bridge, standard tourist imagery, but there are 3 cat postcards mixed in, and Helen finds her attention drawn to those, grateful for something slightly absurd to focus on instead of her anxiety. One shows cats having a tea party, another shows a cat dressed as a nurse which feels appropriately medical for a doctor's office, and the third shows a cat in graduation robes holding a tiny diploma. Helen wonders if the doctor's wife chose that one deliberately, a nod to her husband's profession, or if it was just random selection from her collection. Because clearly the woman collects them, you don't just happen to have multiple cat postcards otherwise. Helen herself has a modest collection collection, maybe 40 cards, kept in an album her mother gave her before she died. The album was new then, intended for photographs, but Helen has used it for postcards instead because she doesn't have many photographs. Photographs require photographers, studios, money for sittings, occasions important enough to commemorate. Postcards just require a penny and the willingness to care about small things. She studies the tea party card, tries to imagine the process of creating it. How long did it take to get 3 cats to sit still simultaneously? How many attempts failed before one succeeded? There's a kind of miracle in the image, not a religious miracle obviously, but a minor miracle of patience and persistence, the triumph of human determination over feline indifference. She feels a kinship with whoever made this card, whoever spent hours arranging cats and costumes and miniature tea sets in pursuit of this one small perfect image. That's what life is, isn't it? Hours of effort for moments of success, most of your attempts failing or falling short, but you keep trying because occasionally something works and that makes all the failure bearable. The door opens and the doctor calls her in, and she has to stop thinking about postcards and start thinking about her cough, about her lungs, about the possibility of tuberculosis, which is what everyone fears when a cough persists. The examination is brief, impersonal, the doctor's hands cold through her thin dress. He listens to her breathing, asks questions, writes notes. He doesn't think it's tuberculosis, probably just bronchitis, but she needs rest and better nutrition, needs to stay warm and dry, needs things that cost money she doesn't have because she works in a textile mill, and the wages barely cover rent and food. Rest is a luxury for people who can afford not to work. The doctor gives her a bottle of tonic, charges her 2 shillings, which is money she needed for other things, sends her back out into the cold afternoon. On her way out, she pauses to look at the postcards again. The cats in their costumes, frozen in their moment of performance, permanently having tea, permanently graduating, permanently offering care. There's something comforting about their permanence, their unchanging nature. Unlike her life, which is precarious and uncertain, full of illness and poverty and struggle, the postcards remain the same. The cats will always be having tea, no matter what happens to her, no matter what happens to anyone. That stability feels valuable somehow, even if it's only the stability of a printed image, even if it exists only in the realm of representation rather than reality. She thinks about the 3 postcards she keeps meaning to buy, ones she's seen at the newsagent's near the mill, ones she's been putting off because 2 shillings just went to the doctor and there's nothing left for postcards. But when she passes the newsagent on her way home, she goes in anyway, looks at the cards, finds the one she wants most, a cat dressed as a mill worker with a tiny apron and a small basket. It's too perfect, too specific to her own life. She has to have it even if it means she'll eat less this week to make up the penny. She buys it, tucks it carefully into her coat pocket, and walks home through the darkening streets feeling like she's won something small but real. The card presses against her ribs through the fabric, a small hard rectangle of proof that someone, somewhere, thought a cat dressed as a mill worker was worth photographing, worth printing, worth selling. And if that's worth doing, then maybe being an actual mill worker is worth something too. Maybe her life, as hard and unrewarding as it feels most days, has some kind of dignity or meaning that exists beyond her ability to perceive it. Let's talk about the postcards that never made it into collections, the ones that got sent instead of saved, because not every cat postcard ended up preserved in an album. Most of them actually fulfilled their intended purpose as mail, as communication, as small gestures of affection or humor or connection between people separated by distance. You're following one such postcard now, watching its journey from purchase to disposal. A woman in Liverpool buys it in 1914, January, just months before the world will change in ways nobody can predict yet, though there are tensions and rumors and a sense that something is building. The woman's name is Dorothy Simmons, and she's buying the card to send to her sister in Manchester who's just had a baby, her first, and Dorothy wants to send something cheerful and congratulatory but not too expensive because money is tight and the baby will need things, practical things, not frivolous gifts. The card shows a cat dressed as a baby in a christening gown, nestled in a miniature cradle. It's sweet without being saccharine, funny without being crude, exactly the right tone for acknowledging a birth when you're not particularly sentimental but want to show you care. Dorothy writes on the back, her handwriting cramped because she's trying to fit as much as possible into the limited space. Congratulations on the baby, hope you're both well, I'll try to visit next month if I can manage the fare. Love, Dorothy. Simple, functional communication, the postcard serving as a cheaper alternative to a letter, a way to maintain contact without spending money she doesn't have. She posts it, pays her halfpenny and moves on with her day, probably doesn't think about it again. The postcard travels through the postal system, that marvel of Victorian and Edwardian infrastructure that moves millions of pieces of mail daily with remarkable efficiency. It's sorted in Liverpool, loaded onto a train, carried to Manchester, sorted again, delivered to her sister's address within 24 hours of being posted. Her sister, Alice, receives it while still in bed recovering from the birth. The baby is sleeping finally, after hours of crying, and Alice is exhausted and sore and overwhelmed by the sudden reality of motherhood, which nobody adequately prepared her for despite all the advice and warnings. She opens the postcard, reads Dorothy's brief message, looks at the cat in the christening gown and laughs. Actually laughs out loud for the first time in days. It's absurd, this cat dressed as a baby, and the absurdity breaks through her exhaustion for a moment, reminds her that the world contains silliness and humor alongside all the difficulty and pain. She props the postcard on her bedside table where she can see it, and for the next few days, while she's stuck in bed following doctor's orders, she looks at it frequently. It becomes a kind of talisman, a reminder that her sister is thinking of her, that there's a world beyond this room and this baby and this overwhelming new responsibility. The cat in its christening gown doesn't judge her for not knowing what she's doing, for feeling inadequate and frightened, for sometimes wishing she could go back to her previous life when she slept through the night and her body was her own and she wasn't responsible for keeping another human alive. The cat just exists in its absurd costume, offering no commentary, making no demands, simply being there as a small point of lightness in days that feel very heavy. But postcards aren't meant to last forever, especially ones that are actually used as mail rather than preserved in collections. After a few weeks, when Alice is up and moving around again, when life has found some kind of new rhythm even if it's chaotic and exhausting, the postcard gets moved from the bedside table to a drawer. Then later, during a bout of organizing, it gets thrown away. Not because Alice doesn't value it or doesn't remember what it meant to her in those first difficult weeks, but because it's just a postcard, just a piece of cardboard, and she needs the space for other things, more important things, baby clothes and nappies and all the accumulated stuff that comes with having a child. The postcard ends up in the dustbin, gets collected with the rest of the household rubbish, and that's the end of its existence. It served its purpose, carried a message, provided comfort, and then ceased to be needed. This is the fate of most postcards actually. For every one that gets carefully preserved in an album, dozens or hundreds get sent and received and eventually discarded. They're ephemeral objects, meant to be disposable, and most of them are disposed of eventually, even if they're saved for a while first. This doesn't diminish their value or importance while they exist, while they're being looked at and appreciated and doing whatever emotional or communicative work they're meant to do. But it does mean that the collections we're talking about, the albums full of preserved postcards, represent a kind of victory over entropy, a deliberate choice to save something that was designed to be temporary. The collectors are fighting against the natural life cycle of these objects, insisting that they matter enough to preserve, that they're worth keeping even though their intended use has been fulfilled, or in many cases never happened because the cards were purchased specifically for collecting rather than mailing. You're in a museum now, though not in the time period we've been inhabiting. You've jumped forward, all the way to the present day, to a small exhibition in a local history museum somewhere in England, maybe Yorkshire or Derbyshire, one of those regional museums that preserve the mundane details of ordinary life that larger institutions ignore. There's a glass case displaying Edwardian postcards, including several of the cat-in-costume variety we've been discussing. A placard explains the postcard craze of the early 20th century, mentions the collecting habits of middle-class women, notes the popularity of anthropomorphized animal imagery. The tone is slightly condescending, the way museum text often is when discussing the enthusiasms of people from the past, as if their passions were quaint and incomprehensible, rather than deeply human responses to specific historical circumstances. You're standing there reading this placard, looking at the postcards behind the glass, and you're trying to imagine the women who collected them. The museum has done its best to provide context, has included information about Edwardian social structures, women's limited opportunities for self-expression, the role of affordable mass-produced imagery in daily life. But something is still missing from the explanation, some essential quality of what it felt like to care about these things, to find meaning and pleasure in accumulating pictures of cats in costumes. The museum can tell you what happened but not quite why it mattered, not in the way it actually mattered to the people involved. The postcards behind the glass are objects now, artifacts, evidence of historical behavior, but they used to be possessions, cherished items, sources of joy and connection and identity for specific women whose names are mostly lost, whose albums were donated to the museum by descendants who didn't want them but thought someone should keep them, that they might be historically interesting even if they weren't personally meaningful anymore. One of the albums on display belonged to a woman named Violet Hutchinson, according to the label. It's open to a page showing 6 cats in various professional costumes: a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a shopkeeper, a policeman, a postman. The album itself is beautiful, leather-bound with gilt edges, clearly expensive when it was purchased around 1908. Violet kept it meticulously, each card positioned perfectly, the pages clean and well preserved. The museum acquired it in 1987 when Violet's granddaughter was clearing out her mother's house after her death and found the album in a trunk in the attic. The granddaughter almost threw it away, thought it was just old junk, but something made her hesitate, made her think maybe it was worth saving, maybe someone would want it. She donated it to the museum, which accepted it gratefully because they were building a collection of Edwardiana, and this fit perfectly. This documented everyday life in a way that more dramatic or important objects didn't. But what the granddaughter couldn't donate, what the museum couldn't acquire, was the knowledge of what the album meant to Violet, why she spent money she probably couldn't easily spare on postcards and albums, why she organized and reorganized the pages, why she cared. That information is gone, lost when Violet died in 1956, never having talked much about her postcard collecting to anyone, because by then it seemed like a trivial thing from her youth, embarrassing maybe, not worth mentioning. Her children knew she'd collected postcards once, but didn't know why, didn't ask, didn't think it was important. And now here's the album in a museum case, reduced to an example of a trend, a data point in a historical phenomenon, stripped of all the personal meaning that made it matter in the first place. You move on to the next case, which displays Edwardian fashion, and then to the one after that, which shows household items from the period. The postcards fade from your immediate attention, become part of the general background of historical objects that fill museums, things that used to matter to someone and now matter differently, or matter less, or matter only as evidence of how people lived and what they cared about in times that feel simultaneously recent and impossibly distant. You're back in 1914 now, summer, summer, and the world is about to break apart in ways that will make postcard collecting seem not just trivial but almost obscene in its frivolity. Though nobody knows this yet in June, when the weather is warm and the postcard market is still thriving and women are still meeting to trade cards and discuss their collections, Margaret Ashworth is hosting her group again, the same women in the same parlour we visited before, except the conversation has shifted slightly. There's talk of tensions in Europe, of things happening in places most of them couldn't locate on a map, the Balkans, Serbia, places that seem very far away from Birmingham. The talk is vague, uncertain, nobody really understands what's happening or whether it matters, whether it will affect them in their daily lives. They discuss it briefly and then return to postcards, which are more comprehensible, more manageable, more within their sphere of influence and control. Margaret has acquired a new series everyone admires, cats as aviators, wearing goggles and leather caps, posed in or near miniature aircraft. Aviation is exciting, modern, the future made visible, and seeing cats dressed as pilots combines that thrilling modernity with the comforting absurdity of the anthropomorphized animals. The women pass the cards around, make appreciative noises, several of them want to trade for duplicates. The negotiations begin, the familiar dance of offer and counter-offer, the assessment of value and desirability. It feels normal, comfortable, a continuation of gatherings that have been happening monthly for years now. There's no sense that this might be the last normal gathering, that within months everything will be different, that some of the women in this room will lose husbands or sons or brothers, that the entire social fabric that makes these leisurely afternoon gatherings possible is about to be torn apart. When war comes in August, it comes suddenly, at least from the perspective of ordinary people who weren't paying close attention to diplomatic maneuverings and alliance systems. One day there's peace, the next day there's war, and everything changes with shocking speed. Men enlist or are conscripted, industries shift to war production, rationing begins, the casualty lists start appearing in newspapers, and postcard collecting, along with many other peacetime hobbies and pastimes, starts to feel inappropriate, indulgent, wrong somehow when boys are dying in France. Margaret keeps collecting but feels guilty about it, feels like she should be doing war work instead, knitting socks or rolling bandages, or contributing to the war effort in some tangible way. She does do those things, everyone does, but she also still buys postcards occasionally, still arranges her albums, still finds comfort in this hobby that predates the war and seems to belong to a different world, a world where cats in costumes was the kind of thing people had time to care about. The postcard market itself changes. Publishers produce patriotic cards, images of soldiers and flags, and stirring slogans about duty and sacrifice. Cat postcards still get produced but less frequently, and when they do appear they sometimes have a martial theme, cats in military uniforms, cats as soldiers or nurses or war workers. It's jarring, this intersection of whimsy and warfare, and some collectors refuse to buy them, find them in poor taste. Others collect them anyway, maybe because they want their collections to be complete, to represent all periods and styles, or maybe because even a cat in a soldier's uniform is still a cat, still offers that small distance from reality that makes reality bearable. You're in a field hospital in France, which seems like an odd place to discuss postcard collecting, but stay with this for a moment because it's relevant in ways that aren't immediately obvious. The year is 1916, and a nurse named Emma Pritchard is working a 12-hour shift that will probably turn into 14 or 16 because there are never enough nurses and always too many wounded. She's exhausted beyond anything she thought possible before the war, has seen things that will stay with her forever, things she'll never be able to adequately describe to anyone who wasn't there. In the rare moments when she's not actively tending to patients, when she can sit down for a few minutes and catch her breath, she takes out a postcard from her pocket. It's creased and worn from being carried around, handled repeatedly, and it shows a cat dressed as a nurse, wearing a tiny cap and apron, holding a miniature medicine bottle. She bought this card before the war, back when she was training in a London hospital and everything seemed manageable, and nursing was a respectable profession but not particularly dangerous or traumatic. She'd thought the card was funny then, this cat pretending to be a nurse, the absurdity of dressing an animal in professional clothing. She'd bought it on a whim, sent it to her mother with a note saying this is what I look like at work, meant as a joke, but her mother had sent it back to her when Emma was posted to France, thinking she might want it, might find it comforting, and surprisingly she does. When she looks at this worn postcard during brief moments of rest, she thinks about that earlier version of herself, the woman who thought a cat dressed as a nurse was the height of comedy, who had no idea what nursing actually meant, what it would require of her physically and emotionally. The cat in its costume seems impossibly innocent now, sweet in a way that almost hurts to look at, but it also reminds her that there was a time before this, that the world wasn't always mud and blood and dying boys, that she used to have thoughts and feelings and interests that had nothing to do with war. The postcard is a tiny fragment of peacetime, a small piece of the normal world that still exists somewhere even if it feels very far away right now. She doesn't show it to anyone, keeps it private, would feel foolish explaining why she carries around a picture of a cat when there are actual human bodies to attend to, actual suffering that makes caring about postcards seem ridiculous. But she does carry it, does look at it, does find something in it that helps her get through days that are otherwise almost unendurable. It's not about the cat, not really. It's about having something small and personal and entirely her own in a situation where almost nothing belongs to her, where her time and energy and body are all conscripted into service, where she exists as a function rather than a person. Back in England, the women who collected postcards are doing the same kinds of work Emma does, just in different settings. They're nursing in hospitals, working in munitions factories, driving ambulances, taking over jobs that men used to do, proving themselves capable in ways they weren't allowed to before the war. And some of them, during whatever brief moments of respite they can find, still think about their collections, still wonder if new cards are being produced, still occasionally buy one when they see it and have a spare penny. It feels transgressive somehow, caring about something so frivolous during wartime, but it also feels necessary. This maintenance of some connection to the person you were before, the interests and passions that defined you when you had the luxury of being defined by anything other than your war work. Catherine Morrison, who we met earlier with her carefully catalogued collection, has lost her husband at the Somme. She received the telegram in September 1916, the worst kind of communication, the kind that tears your life apart in a single moment. She stops collecting after that, can't bring herself to care about postcards when her husband is dead, when the future she thought she had is gone. Her albums sit on a shelf, untouched, and for months she doesn't even look at them. But eventually, maybe 6 months after his death, she takes them down one evening when she can't sleep, when the grief is particularly overwhelming, and she pages through them. Looking at these cards she collected so carefully, arranged so meticulously, she remembers who she was when she cared about these things, and that person feels both very close and impossibly distant. You're in the aftermath now. 1919. The war is over, but nothing feels celebratory. Not really. There's relief that the killing has stopped, but there's also the overwhelming presence of loss, of grief, of absence where people used to be. The influenza pandemic has killed millions more, a second catastrophe layered on top of the first. The world that emerges from this double trauma is changed fundamentally, and the postcard craze, along with many other pre-war enthusiasms, has faded. People still send postcards, still buy them occasionally, but the collecting mania is over, killed by war and death and the sudden maturity that comes from living through horror. It feels impossible now to recapture the innocent enthusiasm that middle-class women brought to collecting pictures of cats in costumes, that sense that such things could matter, could be important, could be worthy of serious attention and organisation and care. Margaret Ashworth still has her albums, still has all 300 cards carefully preserved, but she hasn't added to the collection in 5 years and doesn't plan to start again. She lost her youngest brother in the war, her nephew, 2 of her husband's colleagues, people she knew and cared about, and collecting postcards in the face of that loss feels wrong somehow. Not wrong morally necessarily, but wrong in the sense of being misaligned with reality, with the world as it actually is rather than the world as she thought it was before August 1914. The albums sit on her shelf, a record of a time when her biggest concerns were completing a series or finding a particularly rare German card, and she can't decide if she should feel ashamed of having cared so much about something so trivial or grateful that there was a time in her life when such things could matter, when the world was stable and peaceful enough that you could devote energy to accumulating pictures of dressed-up animals. Her postcard group doesn't meet anymore. 3 of the women have moved away. 1 of them died in the flu pandemic. The others are busy with jobs or volunteer work or caring for damaged men who came back from the war changed in ways that require constant attention. They see each other occasionally, exchange pleasantries, but they don't talk about postcards. That shared enthusiasm that used to connect them feels like it belongs to different people, women they used to be before they knew what they were capable of, before they learned what the world was actually like beneath its veneer of civilization and progress. The postcards remain, physical objects that survived the war even though so much else didn't, but the meaning they carried has shifted, become more complicated, harder to articulate. Eleanor Pemberton, who started this whole discussion several thousand words ago, still has her albums too, still looks through them occasionally. She's older now, her children are grown, her husband is retired, and she has more time than she did before but less interest in filling that time with collecting. The postcards remind her of her younger self, and she feels affection for that woman who cared so much about organising images of cats, but also a kind of amused pity. Did she really spend hours discussing the merits of different photographers? Did she really feel genuine satisfaction from completing a series? Yes, she did, and she doesn't regret it exactly, but she can't quite recapture the feeling, can't make herself care about these things the way she used to. The war created a rupture, a clear division between before and after, and even though she's the same person technically, she doesn't feel like the same person, and the things that mattered to her before feel like they belong to someone else's life. But sometimes, late at night when she can't sleep, when the darkness feels particularly heavy, she takes out one of her albums and pages through it slowly. She looks at cats having tea parties, cats dressed as doctors and teachers and postmen, cats in wedding dresses and sailor suits and graduation robes, and she feels something shift, some small loosening of the grief and loss that has characterized the past 5 years. These images are silly, absurd, utterly divorced from the reality of modern life, and that's exactly why they still have value. They offer a glimpse of a world where the worst thing that could happen was failing to complete a postcard series, where suffering meant having to choose between 2 cards you wanted equally when you could only afford one, where the future seemed predictable and manageable and mostly benign. That world is gone, probably was never as real as it seemed, but the postcards remain as evidence that it existed, at least in imagination, at least for a while. You're in the 1920s now, and everything is different, deliberately, aggressively different. The world is trying to move forward, to shake off the war years, to embrace modernity and speed and change. Women have the vote in Britain finally, or at least women over 30 who meet certain property requirements, which isn't equality, but it's something. It's progress. Fashion has changed dramatically. Hemlines are rising, corsets are disappearing. Women are cutting their hair and smoking cigarettes and doing things that would have scandalized Edwardian society. Jazz is everywhere, cars are common, radio is becoming popular. The future seems to be arriving faster than anyone can process it. And in this context, collecting postcards of cats in costumes feels hopelessly outdated, a relic of a stuffy, repressive era that everyone is trying to forget or move beyond. The younger generation, women in their 20s who were children or teenagers during the war, have no interest in the hobbies their mothers pursued. They find the whole thing baffling, this careful preservation of pictures of dressed-up animals, this elaborate system of trading and organising and cataloguing. Why would anyone care about that? Why would you spend time and money on something so pointless? They have jobs now, or at least more of them do, working as typists and shopgirls and telephone operators. They go to the cinema, dance to jazz, meet men without chaperones, conduct their lives with a freedom that would have been unthinkable 15 years ago. Postcard collecting belongs to the old world, the world of restriction and propriety and endless boring afternoons with nothing to do but organise albums and attend tea parties where you discuss the quality of German printing. But the women who collected during the Edwardian era, who built up these elaborate collections that once meant so much to them, they're still here, in their 40s and 50s now, navigating a world that has changed faster than they could have imagined. Some of them have gotten rid of their collections, boxed them up and given them away or thrown them away, deciding they were taking up space that could be used for something more relevant to modern life. Others have kept them but put them away, stored them in attics or spare rooms. Out of sight but not quite discarded. Not yet. They can't quite bring themselves to throw away something they spent years accumulating, even if they no longer understand why they cared so much. Even if the passion that drove the collecting has completely evaporated. Alice Hartley, the woman who used to check the shop regularly for new cat cards, who felt that small lift of satisfaction each time she added to her collection, still has her album but hasn't opened it in years. It sits on a shelf in her bedroom, behind other books, essentially hidden. Her daughter found it once, when she was perhaps 12, and asked about it, and Alice tried to explain but heard herself sounding defensive, apologetic, as if she needed to justify having cared about postcards. Her daughter looked through the album with polite incomprehension, said they were nice in that tone children use when they're being kind about something they think is boring, and that was the end of the conversation. Alice put the album back on the shelf and hasn't shown it to anyone since. She's not ashamed of it exactly, but she's not proud of it either. It's just there, a record of a time in her life when she had different priorities, different sources of joy, different ways of being in the world. The postcard market still exists in the 1920s, but it's changed significantly. People still send postcards, still buy them at tourist destinations and railway stations, but the collecting craze is over. Publishers produce fewer novelty cards, focus more on scenic views and reproductions of artwork. Some photographers still create animal images, but the market is smaller, the enthusiasm has diminished. Harry Whittier Freeze continues working, keeps photographing cats and dogs and rabbits in costumes, but he's increasingly seen as old-fashioned, a holdover from an earlier era. His work still sells, but not in the quantities it once did, and he knows his particular niche is fading, that the moment when dressed-up animal photography could sustain a career is passing. He's in his 50s now, has been doing this for decades, and he's starting to think about what comes next, what he'll do when the market finally dries up completely. You're watching the collections themselves now as they move through time, becoming less treasure and more burden with each passing decade. The 1930s arrived with economic depression, with households needing to tighten budgets and eliminate anything unnecessary. Albums of postcards take up space in houses that feel too small, too crowded, too full of accumulated stuff from previous generations. Women who collected in the Edwardian era are aging, dying, and their possessions have to be dealt with by children who often have no interest in preserving them, who see only the work of clearing out a house, of deciding what has value and what doesn't. A complete collection of 300 postcards showing cats in costumes does not have obvious value to a daughter cleaning out her mother's house in 1935, dealing with grief and exhaustion and the overwhelming task of sorting through a lifetime of accumulated belongings. Some albums get kept, stored away again in new attics or basements, carried forward by family obligation or vague sentiment, a sense that mother cared about these, so we shouldn't just throw them away even if we don't understand why they mattered. Others get discarded, end up in dustbins or given to jumble sales where they might sell for a few pennies or might not sell at all, might end up thrown away eventually anyway. The individual cards get separated from their carefully curated contexts, lose the organizational logic that their collectors imposed on them. A card that was valuable because it completed a series, that was traded for after months of negotiation, becomes just another random image of a cat in a costume, indistinguishable from dozens of others, its specific significance erased by the loss of context. Catherine Morrison, who catalogued her collection so meticulously, who created that detailed index system, dies in 1938, and her daughter inherits the albums without the notebook that explained the organization. The daughter looks through them, sees postcards of cats, hundreds of them, arranged in some pattern she doesn't understand. She has her own children to worry about, her own household to manage, and she's already dealing with her mother's furniture and clothing and dishes and all the other physical remnants of a life. The postcards feel like the least important thing, the most dispensable. She takes them to a used bookshop, asks if they're worth anything, and the shopkeeper offers her 5 shillings for the lot, not because they're valuable but because he knows someone might buy them eventually, might want them for craft projects or because they like old ephemera. The daughter takes the 5 shillings, glad to be rid of them, glad to have one less thing to store or worry about or feel guilty for not preserving properly. The shopkeeper puts the albums on a shelf where they sit for 2 years, accumulating dust, occasionally examined by customers who find them quaint or amusing but not quite interesting enough to purchase. Eventually he breaks up the albums, sells the individual cards for a penny each to people who want them for decoupage or greeting card making, or just because they think they're charming. The organisational system Catherine spent hours perfecting is destroyed in an afternoon. The cards dispersed to different buyers, the collection that represented years of careful acquisition and thoughtful arrangement scattered irretrievably. This happens to most of the collections eventually, this dissolution, this return to randomness, the loss of the meaning and structure that the collectors imposed on them. But some survive, preserved by accident or by descendants who somehow understand that these objects matter historically even if they don't matter personally. These are the collections that end up in museums eventually, or in the hands of serious collectors of ephemera who emerge later in the 20th century, people who appreciate postcards as artifacts, as documents of social history, as examples of early photography and printing techniques. These later collectors approach the cards differently than the Edwardian women did, with academic interest rather than personal passion, with an eye toward preservation and documentation rather than completion and aesthetic pleasure. They rescue collections from estate sales and junk shops, pay prices that would have seemed absurd to the original collectors, catalogue them with modern archival methods, sometimes donate them to institutions where they can be studied and displayed. This is how Margaret Ashworth's collection survives, how it ends up eventually in a university archive in the Midlands, available to researchers who want to study Edwardian material culture, or the history of women's leisure activities, or the development of postcard photography. Margaret herself would be astonished to know that her albums ended up in a university, that scholars would someday look at them and write papers about them and see them as evidence of historical patterns and social phenomena. She just thought she was collecting pictures of cats because she liked them. You're in the 1950s now, and the world has survived another war, another rupture, another period of loss and reconstruction. The women who collected postcards in the Edwardian era are almost all gone, dead or very old, and whatever they cared about has become definitively historical, separated by not just decades but by fundamental changes in how people live and what they value. The postcard itself has changed its cultural position, become something associated primarily with holidays and tourism, with sending a quick note from a vacation spot, proof that you went somewhere worth photographing. The idea of collecting them seriously, of organising them in albums with the care you'd give to photographs or important documents, seems bizarre to most people. If you mention that your grandmother collected postcards of cats in costumes, people smile politely and maybe ask if you still have them, but there's no real understanding of what that hobby meant, why it mattered, what needs it fulfilled. Sarah Dunn, the laundress who could only afford 1 postcard a month, died during the war, during the flu pandemic actually, in 1918 when she was still relatively young. Her tin box of postcards, that precious collection she looked at when she was too exhausted to do anything else, ended up thrown away by the landlord who cleared out her room after her death. She had no family, no one to inherit her few possessions, and the landlord saw no value in a tin box of postcards. They went into the bin along with her worn-out clothes and the few other items she'd accumulated during her hard life. Those cards, each one chosen carefully from the limited selection at the village post office, each one representing a moment of decision and small indulgence, no longer exist. The images survive in other copies, in other collections, but Sarah's specific cards, the ones she touched and looked at and found meaning in, those are gone completely, returned to pulp or ash or whatever happens to discarded paper over time. This is true for most of the collections we've been following. Florence Kettering's small accumulation of cards from railway stations, kept in a box rather than an album, dispersed after her death in 1942. Helen Crawford's album, the one her mother gave her, ended up water damaged during the Blitz, the building where she lived hit by bombs, and even though Helen survived, the postcards didn't. Ruth Holloway in Pennsylvania kept collecting through the 1920s but stopped during the Depression when money became too tight for any non-essential purchases, and her collection, by then numbering perhaps 80 cards, got thrown away by her husband after her death because he needed the space and couldn't imagine anyone wanting old postcards of cats. The pattern repeats across hundreds or thousands of individual collections, each one representing hours of thought and care and emotional investment, each one eventually ending up discarded or destroyed or scattered, the meaning they carried evaporating when the person who created that meaning dies. But while the physical collections often don't survive, something else does persist, something harder to quantify but still real. The experience of collecting, of caring about something small and controllable and entirely your own, that experience shaped the women who participated in it. It gave them practice in making decisions, in developing taste and judgment, in asserting preferences in a world that didn't ask for their preferences very often. It connected them to other women, created communities based on shared enthusiasm rather than family obligation or social duty. It provided moments of joy and satisfaction in lives that were often constrained and difficult, that offered few opportunities for personal expression or individual achievement. When you collect postcards, you're building something, creating order and meaning and structure according to your own vision, and that matters even if the postcards themselves eventually get thrown away, even if no one remembers or understands why you cared. Eleanor Pemberton died in 1946, and her albums survived her by several decades, passed to her daughter who kept them out of respect even though she never looked at them, then to her granddaughter who found them when clearing out her mother's house in the 1970s. The granddaughter, born in 1950, looked through them with a kind of anthropological interest, trying to understand what her great-grandmother had seen in these images, why she'd spent time and money accumulating them. She couldn't fully grasp it, couldn't bridge the gap between her own world of feminism and career opportunities and birth control, and her great-grandmother's world of restriction and propriety and limited options, but she kept the albums anyway, stored them carefully, had some sense that they were worth preserving even if she couldn't articulate why. You're in an antique shop in the 1980s now, one of those cluttered spaces that smell like dust and old paper and time itself somehow. The shop is full of things people no longer want but haven't quite achieved the status of valuable antiques. Furniture from the 1960s that's not yet retro chic, dishes from the 1950s that aren't collectible yet, books no one reads anymore. And in a corner, in a box labelled ephemera, there are postcards, hundreds of them loose and unsorted, mixed together without any organisation or logic. Among them are cat postcards from the Edwardian era, cards that once belonged to someone's carefully curated collection, now jumbled with advertising postcards and tourist views, and random images from various decades. They cost 50 pence each if anyone wants them, but mostly people rifle through the box without buying anything. Amused by the old-fashioned images but not interested enough to actually purchase them. A woman in her 30s picks up one of the cat cards, shows it to her friend. They both laugh. Look at this. A cat dressed as a bride. How ridiculous. How weird that someone made this, that someone presumably bought it. They put it back, move on to other parts of the shop, and the card returns to the box where it sits with dozens of others, waiting for someone who might see more in it than just ridiculous weirdness. That person eventually comes, a collector of Edwardian ephemera who's been searching for these cards specifically, who's trying to assemble a collection not for personal pleasure but for historical documentation, who sees them as artifacts worth preserving and studying. She buys all the cat cards in the box, 43 of them, pays the shop owner £20 for the lot, takes them home and catalogues them properly, notes their condition and likely date of publication and whatever other information she can determine from examining them. This is how some of the surviving cards exist now, recollected by modern collectors who approach them with entirely different motivations than the original owners. They're not arranging them because they find cats in costumes personally charming, or because completing a series gives them satisfaction. They're preserving them because they're examples of early 20th century popular culture, because they tell us something about gender and leisure and consumer behaviour in the Edwardian era, because they're historical documents that deserve to be maintained for future study. The emotional content has been replaced by intellectual content, personal meaning by historical significance. This isn't wrong necessarily, it's just different. A different kind of valuing that serves different purposes. The internet arrives and changes how collecting works, makes it easier to find specific cards, to connect with other collectors, to research photographers and publishers and printing techniques. Online auctions make formerly rare items accessible if you're willing to pay the price. Specialist dealers emerge who focus on postcards exclusively, who can identify subtle variations in printing or cropping that indicate different editions or publishers. The knowledge that was once informal and personal, passed between collectors through conversation and correspondence, becomes more systematic, more available. You can now look up the work of Harry Whittier Fries, see his entire catalogue, read about his life and methods, understand the technical process he used to create his photographs. You can find academic articles about the postcard craze, sociological analyses of women's collecting habits, cultural studies perspectives on anthropomorphized animal imagery. All of this scholarship and organization and systematic study is valuable, provides insights that the original collectors never had, contextualizes their hobby within larger historical patterns. But something is also lost in this translation from personal passion to academic subject, from treasured possession to documented artifact. The cards become examples of something rather than being valued for themselves, for the specific qualities that made someone want to own them, keep them, look at them repeatedly. The joy that Eleanor Pemberton felt when she added a particularly nice card to her collection, that moment of pure satisfaction, can't be captured in academic analysis or museum documentation. It existed only in her experience of it, and when she died, that particular quality of feeling died with her. But maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just how time works, how the present becomes the past, how the things we care about intensely eventually become things other people study or preserve, or simply wonder about. The postcards remain, at least some of them, and they carry forward some echo of the meaning they once had, even if that meaning has changed fundamentally. A cat dressed as a nurse meant something specific to Emma Pritchard in a field hospital in France, means something different to a museum curator in the 21st century, might mean something else entirely to someone who sees it 100 years from now. The image persists while its significance shifts, adapting to new contexts, serving new purposes, continuing to exist long after everyone who originally cared about it is gone. You're in the present day now, fully arrived in the 21st century, and you're scrolling through an online auction site, looking at listings for vintage postcards. There are hundreds of them available, thousands if you expand your search parameters, shipped from sellers around the world, most of them priced between $5 and $50 depending on rarity and condition. The Edwardian cat postcards are here, digitized and searchable, described in clinical detail. Vintage postcard, cat in wedding dress circa 1910, excellent condition, unused, vibrant colors. The listing includes multiple photographs showing the card from different angles, close-ups of any wear or damage, specifications specifications about size and publisher when that information is available. You can add it to your cart with a click, have it delivered to your door within a week, pay with a credit card, never interact with another human in the entire transaction. This is so far removed from how Eleanor or Margaret or Catherine acquired their postcards that it's almost a different activity entirely, even though the object being collected is technically the same. They had to physically go to shops, build relationships with shopkeepers who would set aside cards for them, attend gatherings to trade with other collectors, wait for new stock to arrive from publishers, accept the limitations of what was available in their geographic area, the hunting, the searching, the patience required. All of that was part of the experience, part of what made acquiring a new card feel significant. You couldn't just instantly obtain any card you wanted, so wanting something and getting it was separated by time and effort, and that separation created value, created the sense that each addition to the collection was an achievement worth noting. Now you can complete an entire series in an afternoon if you're willing to pay for it, can find the rarest cards with a search query, can build in weeks what took years for the original collectors. This efficiency changes the nature of collecting fundamentally, removes the element of chance and patience, collapses the distance between desire and satisfaction. It's not clear this is entirely positive, this ease of acquisition. Something about collecting seems to require difficulty, require the investment of time and attention and sustained interest over time. When you can have everything immediately, does anything feel particularly special? When completion is guaranteed if you're willing to spend the money, does completion carry the same satisfaction? But there are people collecting these cards today, genuinely collecting them, paying attention to them, creating new meanings around them. Some are nostalgic for an era they never experienced, drawn to the aesthetics of early 20th century photography, the color palettes, the printing techniques, the whole material culture of that period. Some are interested in the history of women's leisure, in understanding what daily life was like for middle-class women in 1910, and the postcards provide evidence, small windows into that world. Some just think the images are charming, enjoy the absurdity of cats in human clothing, want to surround themselves with images that are sweet and funny and completely divorced from the anxieties and complications of modern life. The motivations are different from the original collectors, but not entirely different, still driven by some combination of aesthetic appreciation and emotional need, and the human impulse to gather and organize and preserve. There are online communities now where collectors share their finds, discuss variations in printing, help each other identify unknown photographers or publishers. These communities serve some of the same social functions that the Edwardian postcard exchange groups did, creating connection between people who share a niche interest, providing a space where that interest is validated and taken seriously. You can post a picture of a card you just acquired and get immediate feedback from dozens of people who understand why you're excited about it, who can appreciate subtle details that would be invisible to anyone not deeply versed in the subject. The technology is completely different, but the social dynamic is recognizable. This need to share enthusiasm with others who get it, who won't think you're strange for caring about something most people consider trivial. A woman in Seattle collects them now, has maybe 200 cards, displays them in frames throughout her apartment. She discovered them accidentally, bought one at an estate sale because she thought it was cute, then found herself wanting more, then falling into research about their history and production, then actively seeking them out. She knows about Eleanor Pemberton and Margaret Ashworth not specifically but as types, understands that women like them created the market that allows her to collect now. She thinks about them sometimes, these unknown women from a century ago, wonders what they would think about their postcards being sold online, being collected by someone in a city that barely existed when they were alive, being valued for reasons they might not recognize or understand. You're thinking about inheritance now, not in the legal sense but in the broader sense of what gets passed down, what survives, what we receive from previous generations whether we want it or not. The postcards themselves are one kind of inheritance, physical objects that move through time, changing hands and contexts and meanings but persisting as objects. But there's also the inheritance of behavior, of patterns, of the ways people find meaning and structure and joy in their lives. The Edwardian women who collected postcards were doing something that humans have always done, finding small controllable domains where they could exercise choice and judgment and creativity, where they could build something according to their own vision. The specific form changes across time and culture, the objects being collected vary wildly, but the impulse remains constant, this need to gather and organize and preserve, to create personal museums of things that matter to us for reasons we can't always articulate. You can see this pattern repeating in different forms throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, women and men both now, collecting things that seem frivolous or incomprehensible to outsiders but provide genuine satisfaction to the collectors. People collect vinyl records, vintage clothing, sneakers, action figures, manga, video games, art prints, rocks and minerals, stamps, coins, books, anything that exists in multiple variations and can be systematically pursued and acquired and organized. The internet has made all of this easier and harder simultaneously. Easier because you can find anything. Harder because completeness becomes an impossible goal when you can see exactly how much exists, how much you'll never be able to acquire no matter how dedicated you are. But the psychological and emotional functions of collecting remain similar across all these different manifestations. It's about creating order in a chaotic world, about having something that's entirely yours, about developing expertise in a specific domain, about the pleasure of searching and finding and completing. collecting. It's about connection with other collectors who share your enthusiasm, about having something to talk about and think about that isn't the daily grind of work and obligations. It's about making decisions that matter, even if they only matter within the bounded context of the collection, even if no one else cares or understands. These needs don't go away just because society changes, or technology advances, or the specific objects being collected fall out of fashion. The Edwardian women who collected cat postcards were constrained by their historical moment in ways that are difficult to fully appreciate from the present. They couldn't vote, couldn't own property independently in many cases, couldn't pursue careers or educations or personal freedoms that we now take for granted. Their lives were bounded by expectations and rules, and social structures that limited what they could do and be and want. And within those constraints they found this small space of autonomy, this hobby that was acceptable and affordable and entirely their own. They made it matter, through the simple act of treating it as if it mattered, by devoting time and thought and care to it, by building communities around it, by creating elaborate systems of organization and value. Looking back at them from the present, it's easy to feel condescending, to think how sad that they had to settle for collecting postcards when they could have been doing more important things, fighting for suffrage, or pursuing education, or challenging the social structures that confine them. But that perspective misses something essential about how actual people live actual lives, about how you find meaning and satisfaction not in some abstract future where everything is different, but in the present moment with whatever resources and opportunities you actually have. The women who collected postcards weren't settling, they were thriving within constraints, finding ways to be themselves, to express individual taste and personality, to create something meaningful in circumstances that weren't particularly conducive to women creating meaning. And maybe that's the real inheritance, the real thing that gets passed down not through physical objects but through example and pattern. The knowledge that you can find joy and purpose in small things, that trivial seeming hobbies can serve important psychological functions, that creating order and beauty and personal meaning doesn't require grand gestures or important subjects, that cats in costumes can matter if you decide they matter, that your collection of whatever it is you collect is valid and worthwhile because you say it is, because it brings you satisfaction, because it's yours. The Edwardian women who collected postcards probably never thought of themselves as teaching lessons or providing examples for future generations. They were just doing what brought them pleasure, what made their days more bearable, what gave them something to care about and work toward. But in doing that, in taking their own interests seriously, even when those interests seemed silly to others, they demonstrated something about human resilience and creativity, and the endless ways people find to make meaning in their lives. You're in a university library now, in the special collections section, where they keep the fragile and valuable materials, the things that require gloves and supervision and careful handling. A graduate student is sitting at a long table, examining one of the surviving Edwardian postcard albums, taking notes for her dissertation on women's material culture in the early 20th century. She's being very careful with the album, treating it with the respect it requires as an archival object, turning pages slowly, not touching the actual postcards more than necessary. She's taking photographs with a high-resolution camera, documenting each page, each card, creating a digital record that will outlast the physical object, that will make this collection accessible to researchers who can't visit this particular library, who live in other countries or other centuries, who will study these images long after the album itself has crumbled to dust. The graduate student is trying to understand what these collections meant to the women who created them, what functions they served, what they reveal about gender and class and consumer culture in Edwardian Britain. She's read the scholarship on the postcard craze, knows the statistics about production and distribution, understands the economic and technological factors that made mass collecting possible, but she's also trying to get at something more elusive, the subjective experience of collecting, the feelings and motivations that don't show up in statistics or economic analysis. She's looking at the care with which the cards are arranged, the attention to detail in the organization, the preservation of even minor examples, and she's trying to imagine the woman who did this, what she was thinking, what she was feeling, what needs this hobby fulfilled. It's difficult work, this attempt to reconstruct the inner life of someone who left no written record of their thoughts, who didn't consider their hobby significant enough to explain or justify in any formal way. The album itself is evidence, but it's mute evidence. It shows what was collected but not why, demonstrates care and attention, but doesn't explain what drove that care. The graduate student has to infer, to extrapolate, to use her knowledge of the historical period and social context to make educated guesses about motivation and meaning. She's doing good work, thoughtful work, and her dissertation will contribute to our understanding of women's history and material culture. But she knows, sitting there with her gloves and her camera and her careful notes, that she's always going to be outside the experience she's trying to understand, always interpreting from a distance that can't be fully bridged. She finds herself feeling a strange affection for the unknown woman who assembled this album, this careful collector who chose each card deliberately, positioned it precisely, maintained the collection over years. There's something touching about the effort, the sustained attention, the way someone decided these images mattered enough to preserve. The graduate student is herself a collector of sorts, accumulating data and images and citations, building an argument card by card, organizing information according to a structure that makes sense to her even if it might seem arbitrary to outsiders. She recognizes the impulse, understands the satisfaction of completing a section, of finding exactly the right example to illustrate a point, of seeing the whole collection take shape over time. The forms are different but the underlying behavior pattern is similar, this human need to gather and organize and make meaning. When she's done for the day, when she's photographed the entire album and filled pages with notes, she carefully returns it to the archivist who will put it back in its climate-controlled storage, where it will wait for the next researcher who needs it, who will bring their own questions and perspectives and interpretations interpretations. The album will outlive the graduate student, will still be here when her dissertation is finished and published, and eventually forgotten, superseded by newer scholarship with different approaches and questions. The postcards persist while the meanings we assign to them keep changing, each generation finding something different in these images of cats in costumes, using them to understand something about the past or the present or the human condition in general. The cards don't care what we think about them, don't care what significance we assign them. They just exist, fading slowly, requiring increasingly careful preservation, but still here, still showing cats dressed as nurses and teachers and brides, still carrying forward some echo of the moment when they were made and collected and cherished. You're at an estate sale in a suburb somewhere, one of those sad dispersals of a lifetime's possessions, everything priced and tagged and available for purchase by strangers who rifle through drawers and closets looking for bargains or treasures. The person who lived here died without close family, or with family that didn't want most of what was left behind, and now professionals are managing the sale, trying to convert a house full of objects back into money, to clear the space so it can be sold or rented to someone new. Among the items for sale, in a box marked miscellaneous, there's a small album of postcards, not a large collection, maybe 30 cards, all cats in various costumes. The album itself is worn, the binding broken in places, some of the cards coming loose from their corners. It's priced at $10, which is arbitrary, based on nothing except the sale manager's guess about what someone might pay for old postcards. Most people at the sale walk past it without looking. They're here for furniture or jewelry or kitchen items, practical things they can use, or valuable things they can resell. Old postcards don't fit either category for most browsers, but eventually someone picks it up. A man in his 60s who's not looking for anything in particular, just wandering through the sale because he has time to kill on a Saturday morning. He opens the album, looks at the cards, smiles at the absurdity of cats dressed as humans. He thinks maybe his daughter would like it. She collects vintage things, has that kind of nostalgic aesthetic, fills her apartment with old cameras and typewriters and other objects from the past. He buys the album for $10, takes it home, wraps it up and gives it to his daughter the next time he sees her. She loves it, genuinely loves it, not just being polite to her father but actually delighted by this small strange collection. She doesn't know anything about the Edwardian postcard craze, doesn't recognize the photographer's work or the printing techniques, or any of the details that might interest a serious collector. She just thinks the images are charming and weird and funny, enjoys the craftsmanship that went into creating them, appreciates having something old and well made and slightly odd. She puts the album on a shelf in her living room where guests can look through it, and people do. They pick it up and page through it, and make comments about how strange it is that someone made these, that someone collected them. The album becomes a conversation piece, a small repository of wonder and amusement, serving a social function not so different from the one it served when it was first assembled, creating connection between people through shared appreciation of these absurd images. The woman who originally collected these cards, whose name is lost, who might have died decades ago, or might be the person whose estate is being sold, she's gone now, erased, no longer available to explain what the collection meant to her or why she cared. But the cards remain and continue to do their work, continue to charm and amuse and puzzle people, continue to create moments of connection and conversation. The meaning has changed completely, the context is different, the people looking at them have entirely different relationships to the images than the original collector did, but something persists, some quality of the cards themselves that continues to engage people's attention and affection, even when everything else has changed. This is what survives ultimately, not the specific meanings people assign to things, but the capacity of objects to carry meaning, to serve as anchors for feeling and connection and identity, to matter to people in ways that change across time but never quite disappear. The Edwardian women who collected these postcards are gone, their specific experiences and emotions and motivations gone with them, lost to time and death, and the failure of anyone to record what seemed like trivial personal details. But they left behind these objects that continue to exist in the world, that continue to engage people's imagination and curiosity and affection, that carry forward some trace of the care and attention that went into assembling them. That's not immortality exactly, but it's not nothing either. It's what remains when everything else is gone. These small artifacts that testify to the fact that someone once cared, that someone found joy and meaning in gathering and preserving images of cats in costumes, that someone's life included this small strange passion that seemed worth the time and money and effort required to pursue it. And maybe that's enough, this persistence of objects beyond the people who cared about them, this way that collections outlive collectors and continue to serve purposes their creators never imagined. The cards will keep existing until they don't, until they finally degrade beyond recovery, or get lost or destroyed, and while they exist they'll keep meaning different things to different people, keep serving as windows into the past and mirrors for the present, keep demonstrating that humans collect things, that we find meaning in small absurdities, that cats in costumes can matter if we decide they matter. You're standing in your own room now, or your own space wherever you are listening to this, and you're thinking about the things you collect, or the things you used to collect, or the things you've thought about collecting but never quite started. Because everyone collects something, even if they don't think of themselves as collectors, even if what they gather doesn't fit the traditional definition of a collection. You collect experiences, memories, photographs on your phone, bookmarks in your browser, playlists, saved posts on social media, small objects from trips you've taken, gifts from people who matter to you, books you mean to read someday, ideas you want to remember, moments you try to preserve by paying attention to them in a particular way. The impulse is universal, this desire to hold on to things, to create some kind of order and meaning and permanence in a world that's constantly changing, constantly slipping away from you no matter how hard you try to hold on. The Edwardian women who collected postcards of cats in costumes weren't doing anything fundamentally different from what you're doing when you save an image you like, when you organize your photographs into albums, when you keep that ticket stub or that shell from the beach, or that note someone wrote you years ago. You're all participating in the same basic human behavior, finding things that matter to you for reasons you might not be able to fully explain, preserving them against loss, creating small personal archives that reflect your particular tastes and interests and experiences. The technology changes, the objects change, the social context changes, but the underlying need remains constant, this desire to gather and keep and organize, to build something that's yours, that reflects who you are or who you want to be, that provides comfort and satisfaction, and a sense of control in a world that often feels uncontrollable. And like the postcard collectors, you probably sometimes wonder if what you're collecting matters, if it's worth the time and attention and sometimes money you devote to it, if anyone else will care or understand after you're gone. The answer is probably no. Honestly, nobody else will care about your collection the way you care about it, because caring requires context and history, and personal connection that can't be transferred to someone else. Your children or friends or whoever sorts through your possessions eventually will look at what you've kept, and wonder why you kept it, will feel affection for you mixed with bewilderment about your priorities, will probably throw away most of it because they don't need 3 boxes of concert tickets, or 4 photo albums of places they've never been, or your carefully organized collection of whatever it is you carefully organized. And that's okay, that's just how time works, how the present becomes the past, how meaning gets lost and found and transformed. But that doesn't make collecting pointless or sad or a waste of time, because the value isn't in whether it survives you, it's in what it gives you while you're alive, while you're the one doing the collecting and organizing and preserving. It gives you something to think about beside your problems, something to look forward to, something to care about that's entirely your own. It gives you reasons to pay attention to the world, to notice things you'd otherwise miss, to develop knowledge and expertise in some small domain. It gives you connection with other people who share your interest, who get why you care, who can appreciate the subtle distinctions and variations that are invisible to outsiders. It gives you satisfaction when you find something you've been looking for, when you complete a series, or fill a gap, or discover something rare or beautiful or perfect. These are real benefits, real sources of joy and meaning, even if they don't produce anything tangible or important by conventional measures. The women who collected cat postcards knew this, or felt it even if they couldn't articulate it, even if they sometimes wondered if they were being foolish or frivolous, or wasting their time on something that didn't matter. They kept collecting anyway, kept organizing their albums, and attending their meetings and trading their duplicates, because it did matter, to them, in their lives, in their specific circumstances and constraints, and they were right to trust that feeling, right to take their own interests seriously, right to spend time and money and attention on something that brought them pleasure and purpose, even if nobody else understood. That's the inheritance, really, that permission to care about small things, to find meaning where you find it, to collect what you want to collect without apology or justification, to trust that your enthusiasms are valid because they're yours. You're at the end now, or at least the end of this particular telling, this particular way of thinking about postcards and women, and collecting, and time and meaning, and loss, and inheritance, and all the complicated ways we try to matter in a world that mostly forgets us. The cats in their costumes are still out there somewhere, scattered across the world in albums and archives and boxes and frames and online listings, still being looked at by people who find them charming or funny or historically significant, or just pleasantly weird. Some of them have survived over a century, passed through multiple hands, meant different things to different people at different times, and they'll probably keep existing for a while longer, until they finally fade or crumble or get lost or destroyed, until even the digital copies become obsolete formats nobody can access anymore, until the last trace of them finally disappears and they're truly gone, existing only as footnotes in scholarship. Nobody reads about a phenomenon, nobody remembers, but while they exist, while people still look at them and wonder about them, and find meaning in them, they're doing the work they were always meant to do, creating moments of connection and pleasure and reflection, making people smile or think or feel something they wouldn't have felt otherwise. That's not a small thing, that's actually quite a large thing when you think about it. This capacity of images to move through time and keep affecting people, keep meaning something, keep mattering in small ways. The cats dressed as nurses and teachers and brides aren't aware of any of this. Obviously, they were just cats being photographed, briefly tolerating costumes before escaping back to their normal cat lives. The photographers who created the images are long dead, their names mostly forgotten except by specialists. The women who collected the postcards are gone, their specific stories lost except in the broadest outlines. But the images persist, and as long as they persist they carry forward some echo of all that care and attention and passion and effort, some record of the fact that these things happened, that people cared, that lives were lived and interests were pursued and meanings were made. And maybe that's all you can hope for, really, that something you care about outlives you by a little while, that some trace of your attention and affection remains in the world after you're gone, that someone someday looks at something you valued and feels some connection across time, some recognition of shared humanity, some sense that you were real and alive and cared about things, even if those things seem strange or trivial from the distance of decades or centuries. The Edwardian women who collected postcards achieved that much at least, their collections serving as evidence that they existed, that they had inner lives and preferences and passions, that they found ways to be themselves within the constraints of their historical moment, that they made meaning where they could and trusted that it was enough. So here's to them, these unknown women with their albums full of cats, these collectors who took something mass-produced and disposable and made it personal and meaningful and worth preserving, who demonstrated that significance isn't something that's assigned by society or history or important institutions, but something you create through the simple act of paying attention, of caring, of deciding that something matters because you say it matters. Here's to Eleanor and Margaret and Catherine and Alice and Florence and Helen and Ruth and Sarah and Emma and all the others whose names we don't know, who bought postcards and organized albums and attended meetings and traded duplicates and found joy in something the world considered trivial, who were right to trust their own enthusiasms, who leave behind these small monuments to their specific passions and tastes and ways of being in the world. And here's to you, listening to this at whatever hour in whatever place, maybe collecting something yourself, or maybe just wondering about the strange things people care about, the odd ways we all try to matter and connect, and leave some mark, however small, on the world that flows past us constantly, carrying us along whether we're ready or not. The cats in their costumes watch you with their serious faces, wearing their tiny outfits with dignity or indifference, or whatever expression we project onto them, and they don't judge, they don't evaluate, they just exist as evidence that someone thought this was worth making, worth keeping, worth preserving. And maybe that's enough, that simple statement of care, that quiet insistence that small things matter, that attention is a form of love, that collecting is a way of saying yes to the world even when the world is difficult, even when the future is uncertain, even when you know that everything passes and nothing lasts, but you choose to care anyway, choose to gather and organize and preserve, choose to find beauty and meaning and connection where you can, choose to trust that your particular enthusiasms are valid and worthwhile simply because they're yours, because they make your days more bearable, because they give you something to look forward to and think about and share with others who understand, because in the end that's what we all do. We all collect something. We all try to hold on to moments and objects and feelings that matter to us, and we're all right to do so. We're all justified in caring about whatever we care about, and the cats in their wedding dresses and sailor suits and graduation robes watch over all of it with their inscrutable feline wisdom, neither approving nor disapproving, just being there, just persisting, just remaining as small beautiful absurdities in a world that needs more beauty and absurdity, and less judgment about what deserves our attention and affection and care. The rain outside has probably stopped by now, or maybe it's just starting, depending on where you are and what time it is, and what season surrounds you. The room is quiet except for this voice, these words, this story about women and postcards and cats and time and loss and meaning. Your pillow is exactly where you left it, your blanket exactly as warm as it was when we started. Nothing has changed except that 30 sections have passed, a long story has been told, and somewhere in the telling maybe you found something useful or comforting or interesting enough to carry with you into sleep, or into the next part of your day. The postcards are still out there in the world, waiting in their albums and boxes and frames, waiting for the next person who will look at them and wonder, and maybe understand something about the human need to collect, to preserve, to care about small, beautiful, absurd things in a world that insists we should be serious and practical, and focused only on what matters, when really, everything matters if you decide it matters, when really the cats in their costumes are as worthy of attention as anything else, as valid a focus for passion and care as great art or important achievements, or any of the things the world tells us we should value instead. Sleep well, if that's what you're here for. Think gently about the past, about the unknown women who collected these cards, about all of us trying to matter in our small ways, trying to leave something behind, trying to find joy and meaning where we can. The cats will still be there in the morning, dressed in their impossible outfits, waiting patiently for someone to care about them again, to see them, and smile, and wonder at the strangeness of it all, at the beautiful persistent absurdity of human enthusiasm, at the way we all collect something, the way we all try to hold on to what matters, even when we can't quite explain why it matters, even when no one else understands, even when time carries everything away eventually, but we care anyway. We keep caring, we gather and organize and preserve, and that caring is enough. That caring is everything. That caring is what makes us human, what connects us across time, what the postcards carry forward long after everything else is forgotten. Rest now. Let the cats watch over your dreams with their serious faces and their ridiculous costumes. Everything is exactly as it should be. Everything is exactly as strange and beautiful and temporary as it always was. And that's perfectly fine. That's more than fine. That's exactly right.